My husband is living in luxury with his new girlfriend while I'm handling his debts. He told me to move on. He'll regret that soon. I'm done, he said, his eyes cold and unapologetic as he tossed the credit card bills in my face. He makes me happy. You're on your own now. He turned to leave, but I caught his arm, my grip as tight as a vice. You'll regret this, I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. I promise you that. He yanked his arm away, his lip curling in disgust. You're pathetic, you know that? Clinging to a man who doesn't want you anymore. I've found someone better, someone who actually makes me feel alive. And you're just a bitter, washed-up housewife with nothing to offer. Hey, beautiful people. Your support means everything to me. Help me reach my next big milestone by hitting that subscribe button. It's free, supports the channel, and ensures you never miss an amazing video. Let's dive in. His words cut deep, but I refused to let him see me crumble. I straightened my spine and met his gaze head-on, my eyes blazing with barely contained fury. We'll see about that, I said evenly. I gave you the best years of my life, supported you through everything, and this is how you repay me? By running off with some cheap tramp and leaving me to deal with your mess? He scoffed, shaking his head. You just don't get it, do you? This isn't about you. It's about me and what I want. And I don't want you anymore. I want her. I want the life she can give me, not this boring, suffocating existence you've trapped me in. I felt like I'd been slapped. Trapped you? I loved you, you selfish bastard. I gave you everything and you threw it away like it meant nothing. He shrugged, his expression bored. Call it what you want. The truth is I've outgrown you. And now I'm moving on to bigger and better things. You should try it sometime. With that, he turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind him with a finality that echoed through the emptiness of the house we once shared. I stood there, trembling with a mixture of rage and despair, the credit card bills still clutched in my hand. How had it come to this? Just a year ago we'd been happy. Or so I'd thought. We'd been married for nearly a decade, and while things hadn't always been perfect, I'd never once doubted his love for me. But now, as I stared at the evidence of his betrayal in black and white, I realized just how blind I'd been. The bills were astronomical, a dizzying array of charges for five-star hotels, expensive dinners, and lavish gifts. He'd been living a double life, indulging in a fantasy with his mistress while I'd been at home, struggling to keep our heads above water. And now he had the audacity to walk away, leaving me to drown in the debts he'd racked up. But he'd underestimated me. He thought I was weak, that I'd simply collapse under the weight of his cruelty. He was wrong. As I stood there, surrounded by the shattered remnants of our life together, something inside me hardened into an unbreakable resolve. I would not let him destroy me. I would not let him win. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I'd never thought I'd have to use. Ethan, it's me. I need your help. Ethan was an old friend, a private investigator I'd met years ago when I'd worked as a paralegal. We kept in touch sporadically over the years, and I knew he had a reputation for being discreet and efficient. If anyone could help me uncover the truth about my husband's double life, it was him. What do you need? He asked, his voice tinged with concern. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to set in motion. I need you to find out everything you can about my husband's mistress. Who she is, where she works, what kind of assets she has. I want to know everything. Ethan was silent for a moment. Are you sure you want to go down this road, Jenna? It could get ugly. I closed my eyes, picturing my husband's smug, unrepentant face. I'm sure, I said firmly. He thinks he can just walk away and leave me holding the bag. But he's about to learn that actions have consequences. Okay, Ethan said finally. I'll see what I can dig up. But Jenna, be careful. Don't let this consume you. Too late for that, I said with a humorless laugh. He's already taken everything from me. My heart, my dignity, my future. All I have left is my anger, and I'll be damned if I let him take that too. I hung up the phone, my mind racing with possibilities. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but one thing was certain. My husband was going to pay for what he'd done. He thought he could escape unscathed, but he was about to find out just how wrong he was. As I gathered up the bills and began to sort through them with a ruthless efficiency, a smile slowly spread across my face. It was not a pleasant smile, but one filled with dark promise. My husband had started this war, but I was going to finish it. And when the dust settled, only one of us would be left standing. He wanted me to move on. Well, I'd move on all right. But first I'd make sure he lived to regret ever crossing me. That was a promise I intended to keep no matter what it cost me in the end. The next few weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and endless phone calls. The more I dug into our finances, the worse it got. It wasn't just the credit card bills. There were unpaid loans, overdue taxes, and a mountain of debt that stretched back years. How had I not seen it before? How had I let it get this bad? I tried to piece together the shattered remnants of our life, but everywhere I turned, I was met with another dead end. The bank refused to help me, citing my husband's name on all the accounts. The credit companies laughed in my face when I begged for mercy. Even our supposed friends turned their backs on me, unwilling to get involved in the messy aftermath of our broken marriage. I was drowning and there was no one to throw me a lifeline. Late at night, when the silence of the empty house became too much to bear, I would pore over the bills, trying to make sense of the numbers that swam before my eyes. I'd always been good with money, careful and frugal, but this was beyond anything I'd ever dealt with before. The sums were staggering, the interest rates crippling. It was like trying to scale a mountain with no end in sight. I cut back on everything, living on ramen noodles and tap water, but it barely made a dent. The bills kept coming, each one a fresh blow to my already battered psyche. I started to dread the sound of the mailman's footsteps, knowing that he brought only more bad news. And through it all, my husband lived like a king. Ethan had come through with the information I'd requested, and what he'd uncovered made my blood boil. My husband's mistress was a wealthy socialite, the kind of woman who'd never had to worry about money a day in her life. Together they jetted off to exotic locales, dined at the finest restaurants, and bought whatever their hearts desired, all while I was left to pick up the pieces of the life they'd shattered. It wasn't fair. It wasn't right. But what could I do? I was just one woman, alone and powerless against the tidal wave of debt that threatened to consume me. I started to feel like I was losing my mind, the stress and anxiety eating away at me like a cancer. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think beyond the next bill, the next collection call. And then on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, everything changed. I was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of overdue notices and final warnings, when a knock sounded at the door. I almost didn't answer it, assuming it was just another creditor come to harass me. But something made me get up and pad wearily to the front hall. When I opened the door, I found myself face to face with a tall, imposing man in a dark suit. He looked vaguely familiar, but I couldn't quite place him. "Mrs. Hawthorne?" he asked, his voice deep and slightly accented. I nodded warily, my guard up. "Who are you?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card, handing it to me with a slight bow. "My name is Luca Russo. I represent your husband's mistress, Miss Genevieve Belmont." I stared at him in shock, my mind reeling. What could this woman possibly want with me? "I don't understand," I said slowly. "What is this about?" Luca smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "May I come in? I have a proposition for you." Against my better judgment, I stepped aside and let him enter. As he settled himself on the couch, I perched on the edge of the armchair, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. "What kind of proposition?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Luca leaned forward, his dark eyes boring into mine. "Miss Belmont is aware of your financial difficulties," he said smoothly. "She understands that your husband's actions have put you in an untenable position. She wants to help." I laughed bitterly. "Help? She's the reason I'm in this mess in the first place. If it wasn't for her, my husband would still be here and I wouldn't be drowning in his debts." Luca shook his head. "You misunderstand me, Mrs. Hawthorne. Miss Belmont is not responsible for your husband's choices. But she does feel a certain obligation to make things right. That's why she's prepared to offer you a deal." I stared at him, my heart pounding in my chest. "What kind of deal?" Luca smiled again, and this time, there was a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. "The kind of deal that could solve all your problems, Mrs. Hawthorne. The kind of deal that could give you your life back, and make your husband pay for what he's done." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a stack of papers, placing them on the coffee table in front of me. "All you have to do is sign on the dotted line," he said softly. "And then, my dear, the real fun begins." I hesitated, my mind whirling with possibilities. I knew I should say no, should tell this man to get out of my house and never come back. But the temptation was too great. The chance to finally be free of the debts that were crushing me, to make my husband suffer the way I had suffered. It was too much to resist. With a shaking hand, I reached for the pen. And as I signed my name, I felt a rush of dark satisfaction wash over me. My husband had started this war. But with Miss Belmont's help, I was going to finish it. And heaven help anyone who got in my way. As I sat across from Luca Russo, the weight of what I'd just done began to sink in. I'd made a deal with the devil, or at least with his mistress. What kind of person did that make me? What kind of depths had I sunk to, that I was willing to align myself with the woman who'd stolen my husband, just to get my revenge? But there was no going back now. The papers were signed, the die was cast. And as much as it pained me to admit it, I needed Miss Belmont's help. I couldn't take on my husband alone, not when he had all the money and all the power. I needed an ally, even if that ally was the last person I ever thought I'd turn to. Luca leaned back in his seat, a self-satisfied smirk on his face. "Excellent choice, Mrs. Hawthorne," he said smoothly. "I think you'll find that Miss Belmont can be a very valuable friend to have." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Luca's smile widened. "Now, my dear, we get to work. Miss Belmont has a plan, but she needs your help to pull it off. Are you ready to hear what she has in mind?" I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. "Tell me." Over the next hour, Luca laid out the details of the plan. It was audacious, risky, and more than a little bit illegal. But it was also brilliant in its simplicity. Miss Belmont had been watching my husband for months, gathering evidence of his shady business dealings and questionable financial practices. She had proof that he'd been embezzling money from his clients, funneling it into offshore accounts and using it to fund his lavish lifestyle with her. But she couldn't go public with the information, not without implicating herself in the process. That's where I came in. As his wife, I had access to his personal records, his computer, his phone. I could gather the evidence she needed to take him down, and in return she would make sure that I was taken care of financially. It was a gamble, but what did I have to lose? My husband had already taken everything from me. My home, my security, my dignity. All I had left was my anger and the burning desire to make him pay. And so I agreed. Over the next few weeks, I became a spy in my own home, rifling through my husband's papers, hacking into his email and tracking his every move. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once, knowing that I held the key to his destruction in my hands. But as I dug deeper into his secrets, I began to realize just how little I knew about the man I'd married. The evidence of his betrayal was everywhere. In the love letters he'd written to his mistress, in the extravagant gifts he'd bought her with money that should have been mine. I found myself obsessing over every detail of their relationship, torturing myself with visions of their stolen moments together. And then one day I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a series of emails between my husband and a man named Sergey, discussing a shipment of illegal weapons that was set to arrive in the city in just a few days. My husband was involved in arms trafficking, and from the looks of it, he was in deep. I sat back in my chair, my heart racing. This was bigger than just a case of infidelity and financial fraud. This was dangerous, the kind of thing that could get people killed. And my husband was right in the middle of it. For a moment, I considered turning back, washing my hands of the whole sordid affair. But then I thought of all the years I'd wasted on him, all the love and trust I'd poured into our marriage, only to have it thrown back in my face. No, I couldn't let him get away with it. I had to see this through, no matter the cost. I printed out the emails and tucked them into my purse, my hands shaking as I dialed Luca's number. "I found something," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. "Something big. We need to meet now." An hour later, I was sitting in a dimly lit bar, sliding the emails across the table to Luca. He scanned them quickly, his eyes widening as he took in the details. "This is impressive, Mrs. Hawthorne," he said finally, his voice tinged with something like respect. "Miss Belmont will be very pleased with this information." I leaned forward, my heart pounding in my ears. "What happens now?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Luca smiled, a slow, predatory grin that sent shivers down my spine. "Now, my dear, we take your husband down. And when we're done with him, he'll wish he never laid eyes on Genevieve Belmont. Or on you." I sat back in my seat, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me. My husband had underestimated me, had thought he could cast me aside like yesterday's trash. But he was about to learn the hard way that I was not a woman to be trifled with. I had the power to destroy him, and with Miss Belmont's help, that's exactly what I was going to do. The other woman had started this war, but I was going to be the one to finish it. And when the dust settled, only one of us would be left standing. And it sure as hell wasn't going to be my lying, cheating husband. I left the bar with Luca's words ringing in my ears, my mind racing with possibilities. I had the evidence I needed to take my husband down, but I knew it wouldn't be enough on its own. If I was going to make him pay for what he'd done, I needed to hit him where it hurt, his wallet, his reputation, and his precious mistress. Over the next few days, I threw myself into plotting my revenge with a single-minded focus that bordered on obsession. I barely slept, barely ate, my every waking moment consumed with thoughts of how to make my husband suffer the way he'd made me suffer. I started by gathering more evidence, hacking into his bank accounts and tracing the flow of money from his illicit dealings. I discovered that he'd been funneling cash into a series of shell companies, using them to finance his lavish lifestyle and shower his mistress with gifts. It was the smoking gun I needed to prove that he'd been embezzling from his clients, and I knew it would be the key to bringing him down. But I didn't just want to ruin him financially. I wanted to destroy his reputation, to make sure that he could never show his face in polite society again. And for that, I needed to enlist the help of some old friends. I reached out to my former colleagues from my days as a paralegal, the ones who'd always suspected that my husband was up to no good. They were more than happy to help me dig up dirt on him, feeding me information about his shady business practices and the clients he'd scammed over the years. I compiled it all into a dossier, a damning indictment of his character that I knew would be his undoing. But the final piece of the puzzle was his mistress, the woman who'd stolen him away from me. I knew that if I could turn her against him, if I could make her see him for the lying, cheating bastard he really was, it would be the ultimate revenge. And so, I set my sights on Genevieve Belmont, determined to uncover every dirty secret in her past. I hired private investigators to dig into her background, to find out everything they could about her family, her finances, and her many lovers. What I found was a goldmine of scandal and impropriety, the kind of information that could ruin her just as surely as it would ruin my husband. Armed with this knowledge, I set my plan in motion. I leaked the information about my husband's illegal dealings to the press, watching with grim satisfaction as his face splashed across the front pages of every newspaper in town. I sent the dossier on his shady business practices to his clients and his competitors, watching as they turned on him like a pack of hungry wolves. And then I went after his mistress. I sent her copies of the love letters he'd written to me, the ones where he'd sworn his undying devotion and promised to love me forever. I included photos of our wedding day, our honeymoon, the life we'd built together, all the things he'd thrown away for a cheap fling with a socialite. I watched as Genevieve's world crumbled around her, as the society pages turned on her and her so-called friends abandoned her in droves. I reveled in her humiliation, in the knowledge that she was finally getting a taste of the pain she'd inflicted on me. But I saved the best for last. I arranged a meeting with Genevieve under the pretense of offering her a deal. I told her that I had evidence that could ruin my husband, that I was willing to share it with her if she helped me take him down. She was desperate, backed into a corner, and I knew she'd jump at the chance to save herself. And so she agreed. Together we set the trap for my husband, luring him to a hotel room with the promise of a lucrative business deal. When he arrived, he found himself face to face with me, Genevieve, and a team of federal agents, all armed with the evidence of his crimes. The look on his face as they slapped the cuffs on him was something I'll never forget. The shock, the anger, the dawning realization that he'd been outplayed by the two women he'd wronged the most. It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph, and I savored every second of it. As they led him away, I turned to Genevieve, my lips curled in a smirk. "I told you I'd make him pay," I said, my voice cold and hard. "And now he'll spend the rest of his life rotting in a cell, knowing that it was his own greed and arrogance that put him there." She looked at me with something like respect, a grudging admiration for the woman who'd outmaneuvered her at every turn. "You're a force to be reckoned with, Mrs. Hawthorne," she said, her voice tinged with bitterness. "I almost feel sorry for him." I laughed, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed off the walls of the empty hotel room. "Don't waste your pity on him," I said, my eyes glinting with a savage kind of triumph. "He brought this on himself. And now he's going to pay for every last one of his sins." And with that, I turned and walked away, my head held high and my heart finally free of the weight of his betrayal. My revenge was complete and I was ready to face whatever came next. My husband had tried to break me, but in the end I was the one who'd broken him. And that was a victory that no one could ever take away from me. The news of my husband's arrest spread like wildfire. The scandal splashed across every front page and news channel in the city. The once respected businessman, the darling of the social scene, was exposed as a fraud and a criminal, his carefully crafted facade crumbling to dust in the face of the overwhelming evidence against him. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, a sense of grim satisfaction washing over me with every new revelation. The emails, the bank statements, the incriminating photos. It was all laid bare for the world to see, a damning indictment of the man I'd once loved with all my heart. But as the days turned into weeks and the media frenzy showed no signs of abating, I began to feel a creeping sense of unease. The man they were describing in the papers, the monster who'd cheated and lied and stolen his way to the top. Was that really the same man I'd married? The same man who'd held me close on our wedding night and promised to love me forever? The truth was, I didn't know anymore. The more I learned about my husband's double life, the more I realized just how little I'd really known him. The man I'd thought I'd married, the man I'd built a life with, he'd been nothing more than a mirage, a shimmering facade that had hidden the ugly truth beneath. And now, as the trial loomed on the horizon and the evidence mounted against him, I found myself questioning everything I'd ever believed about our marriage. Had any of it been real? Or had I just been a pawn in his game, a convenient cover for his lies and his crimes? The day of the trial arrived, and I steeled myself to face the man who'd shattered my world into a million pieces. I walked into the courtroom with my head held high, determined to show him that he hadn't broken me, that I was stronger than he'd ever given me credit for. But when I saw him sitting there at the defense table, his once proud shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt a sudden rush of emotion that I couldn't quite name. Anger, yes, and betrayal and hurt. But something else too, something that felt strangely like pity. As the trial unfolded and the evidence was presented, I watched my husband's facade crumble even further. The confident, charming man I'd once known was nowhere to be seen, replaced by a broken shell of a person who could barely meet my eyes across the courtroom. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch on forever, his mistress took the stand. Genevieve Belmont, the woman who'd stolen my husband and shattered my life, and the woman who'd helped me bring him to justice. She was poised and elegant as ever, but there was a brittleness to her now, a fragility that hadn't been there before. As she recounted the sordid details of their affair, the lavish gifts and the whispered promises, I saw the cracks in her own facade beginning to show. And then, in a stunning twist that sent shockwaves through the courtroom, she turned on him. With cold, clinical precision, she laid out every last one of his crimes, every dirty secret and hidden misdeed. She held nothing back, her voice steady and unwavering as she painted a picture of a man consumed by greed and hubris, a man who'd stop at nothing to get what he wanted. I watched my husband's face as she spoke, saw the dawning horror and disbelief in his eyes as he realized just how thoroughly he'd been betrayed. In that moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. But then I remembered all the years of lies and deceit, all the pain and heartbreak he'd put me through. I remembered the debts and the shame, the nights I'd spent crying myself to sleep while he was out living the high life with his mistress. And I knew that he deserved every bit of what was coming to him. In the end, the verdict was swift and decisive. Guilty on all counts, with a sentence that would see him spending the rest of his days behind bars. As the judge handed down the ruling, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. It was over. The battle was won, and my husband's facade was shattered beyond repair. He'd been exposed for the fraud and the liar that he was, and he'd pay the price for his crimes. But even as I savored the victory, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hollowness, a void where my heart had once been. My marriage, my life, it had all been built on a foundation of lies, and now that the truth had come out, I wasn't sure what was left. I walked out of the courtroom that day a different woman than the one who'd walked in. I was harder, colder, more cynical than I'd ever been before. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I knew that I could never go back to the life I'd once had. But I also knew that I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. I'd survived the worst that life had thrown at me, and I'd come out the other side. I might have been broken, but I wasn't beaten, and I never would be again. As I stepped out into the bright sunlight of the courthouse steps, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. My husband's facade might have been shattered, but mine was just beginning to take shape. I was ready to face whatever came next. And heaven help anyone who tried to stand in my way. The weeks after the trial passed in a blur of media interviews and legal meetings, as I tried to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. The press hounded me relentlessly, eager for any scrap of information about the scandalous downfall of my once powerful husband. At first, I reveled in the attention, basking in the glow of my hard-won victory. I gave interviews to anyone who would listen, spilling every sordid detail of my husband's betrayal and my own quest for vengeance. I wanted the world to know what he'd done, to see him for the monster he really was. But as the days turned into weeks and the spotlight began to fade, I found myself struggling to adjust to my new reality. The truth was, for all the satisfaction I'd felt in bringing my husband to justice, there was a part of me that felt strangely empty inside. I'd spent so long focused on my revenge, on making him pay for what he'd done to me, that I'd never really stopped to think about what would come next. Now that it was all over, I felt like I was drifting, searching for a purpose in a world that had been turned upside down. The money helped, of course. With my husband's assets frozen and his company in shambles, I'd become the sole beneficiary of his vast fortune. I had more money than I could ever spend in a lifetime, and at first I reveled in the freedom it brought me. I bought a new house, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of the city where I could escape the prying eyes of the media. I traveled the world, indulging in every luxury and excess that money could buy. I even started a foundation in my own name, dedicated to helping women who'd been betrayed and abandoned by the men they loved. But even as I poured myself into my new life, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. The truth was, for all the trappings of wealth and success, I was lonely. I'd lost more than just my husband when I'd embarked on my quest for vengeance. I'd lost my friends, my family, and my sense of self. The people who'd once been closest to me had turned their backs when the scandal broke, too afraid of being tainted by association to stand by my side. Even my own parents had distanced themselves, too ashamed of their daughter's public humiliation to offer any comfort or support. And then there were the nightmares. Night after night, I woke up screaming, haunted by visions of my husband's face twisted in rage and betrayal. I saw myself as he must have seen me in those final moments, a cold and ruthless monster who'd stop at nothing to get what she wanted. I tried to tell myself that it was all worth it, that the price of my vengeance was a small one to pay for the justice I'd won. But in the darkest hours of the night, when the doubts and the fears came creeping in, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. Had my quest for revenge really been worth the cost? Had I sacrificed too much in my pursuit of justice, my own happiness and peace of mind among them? I didn't have any easy answers, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep waking up every morning feeling like a stranger in my own skin, haunted by the ghosts of my past and the choices I'd made. And so I made a decision. I sold the mansion and the cars, donated the money from my foundation, and booked a one-way ticket to a place where no one knew my name or my story. I needed to start over, to find a way to make peace with what I'd done and who I'd become. It wasn't easy, of course. There were days when the pain and the regret threatened to overwhelm me, when I wondered if I'd ever be able to look at myself in the mirror again without feeling the weight of my own sins. But slowly, day by day, I began to heal. I found a therapist who helped me work through my trauma and my guilt, who taught me how to forgive myself for the choices I'd made in the heat of my anger and pain. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, using my own experiences to help other women who'd been through similar struggles. And in time, I even started to date again, opening myself up to the possibility of love and connection after so many years of isolation and mistrust. It wasn't a perfect ending by any means. I still had my scars, both physical and emotional, and there were days when the memories of what I'd been through threatened to drag me back down into the darkness. But I was learning to live with them, to accept them as a part of who I was and who I'd become. Because in the end, that was the real price of my vengeance. Not the money or the status or the public humiliation, but the person I'd had to become to see it through. I'd had to harden my heart and sharpen my claws, to become a version of myself that I barely recognized and wasn't always sure I liked. But I was learning to make peace with her too. To accept that she was a part of me, just like every other version of myself I'd ever been, the naive young bride, the betrayed wife, the avenging fury. They were all me, for better or for worse, and I was slowly learning to embrace them all. Because that was the only way forward, the only way to find the happiness and the peace I'd been chasing for so long. Not by running from my past or trying to erase it, but by facing it head-on and learning to live with the choices I'd made. It was a hard road, and there were still days when I wasn't sure I had the strength to keep walking it. But I knew now that I had no other choice. I'd paid the price for my vengeance, and now it was time to start living with the consequences. And maybe, just maybe, to start building something better from the ashes of what I'd lost. Months turned into years as I slowly began to rebuild my life, piece by painstaking piece. It was a journey of self-discovery and healing, a chance to rediscover the woman I'd been before my world had shattered into a million jagged shards. I threw myself into my work at the women's shelter, finding a sense of purpose and fulfillment in helping others navigate the same struggles I'd faced. I listened to their stories, held their hands as they cried, and celebrated their victories as if they were my own. In them, I saw echoes of my own journey, the pain, the fear, the desperate longing for a way out. But I also saw something else, a strength and resilience that took my breath away. These women had been through hell, had survived things that would have broken most people beyond repair. And yet here they were, still standing, still fighting, still daring to hope for something better. They inspired me in ways I never could have imagined, and slowly, day by day, I began to feel a spark of that same strength kindling within me. I started to see myself through their eyes, not as a victim or a broken thing, but as a survivor, a warrior, a force to be reckoned with. And as I grew stronger, I began to make changes in my own life as well. I started taking better care of myself, eating well and exercising regularly, nurturing my body and mind in ways I'd neglected for far too long. I took up hobbies I'd always been too busy for, painting, gardening, even learning to play the piano. But perhaps the biggest change of all was in my relationships. For so long I'd closed myself off from the world, too afraid of being hurt again to let anyone get close. But as I began to heal, I started to realize just how much I'd been missing. I reached out to old friends I'd lost touch with, rekindling connections that had once meant the world to me. I even started dating again, opening myself up to the possibility of love and companionship after so many years of isolation. It wasn't always easy, of course. There were still days when the old fears and doubts would come creeping back in, when I'd catch myself retreating back into my shell. But I was learning to push through them, to remind myself of how far I'd come and how much I still had to offer the world. And as the years passed, I began to see the fruits of my labor in ways I never could have imagined. The women's shelter I'd poured my heart into was thriving, helping countless women and children escape the cycle of abuse and build new lives for themselves. My friendships were deeper and more meaningful than ever, a source of love and support that sustained me through even the darkest of times. And then one day something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail, a simple white envelope with no return address. At first I almost didn't open it. After all this time I'd learned to be wary of surprises. But something told me this was different, and so, with trembling hands, I tore open the seal and began to read. It was from my ex-husband, the man who'd once shattered my world into a million pieces. He was writing from prison, where he'd been serving out the remainder of his sentence. The letter was short and to the point, but the words still hit me like a punch to the gut. He was sorry, he said. Sorry for all the pain he'd caused me, sorry for the lies and the betrayal and the years of deceit. He knew he had no right to ask for my forgiveness, but he wanted me to know that he'd spent every day since his conviction trying to become a better man, to make amends for the wrongs he'd done. He was getting out soon, he said. And he wanted to see me, to apologize in person and to try to make things right. I stared at the letter for a long time, my mind reeling with 1,000 conflicting emotions. A part of me wanted to tear it up and throw it away, to tell him that he'd lost the right to ask anything of me the moment he'd destroyed our marriage. But another part of me, the part that had been through so much and come out the other side, knew that I needed to face him, to look him in the eye and tell him once and for all that I was done letting him control my life. And so, with a deep breath and a silent prayer for strength, I picked up the phone and dialed the number he'd given me. It was time, I knew, to finally close this chapter of my life, to lay to rest the ghosts of my past and start looking towards the future. I didn't know what that future would hold, or where this road would take me in the end. But I knew one thing for certain. I was ready to find out. I was ready to rise from the ashes of my old life and start building something new, something better, something that was all my own. And as I listened to the ringing of the phone and waited for my ex-husband to answer, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a calm certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. I had walked through the fire and come out the other side, stronger and wiser and more alive than I'd ever been before. And whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew I had the strength to face them head-on. Because I was a survivor. I was a warrior. I was a force to be reckoned with. And nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again. The day of the meeting arrived, and I found myself standing outside a small coffee shop in the heart of the city, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for my ex-husband to arrive. I'd chosen the location carefully, a neutral ground where we could talk without the weight of our shared history hanging over us. As I waited, I found myself fidgeting with the sleeve of my jacket, my nerves getting the best of me. It had been years since I'd seen him, years since I'd looked into the eyes of the man who'd once been my entire world. I didn't know what to expect, didn't know how I would feel when I finally came face to face with him again. But before I could lose my nerve, I heard a familiar voice calling my name, and I turned to see him walking towards me, his face lined with a mixture of nervousness and hope. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer and his face more weathered than it had been on our wedding day. But there was still a glimmer of the man I'd once loved in his eyes, a hint of the charm and charisma that had first drawn me to him all those years ago. We sat down at a table by the window, 2 steaming cups of coffee between us, and for a moment neither of us spoke. The weight of all the years and all the pain hung heavy in the air, and I could feel my throat tightening with emotion as I struggled to find the words. But finally he broke the silence, his voice soft and hesitant as he spoke. "I'm sorry," he said, his eyes meeting mine with a sincerity that took my breath away. "I know I hurt you and I know there's nothing I can say or do to take that back. But I need you to know that I'm truly, deeply sorry for everything I put you through." I nodded, my own voice barely above a whisper as I replied. "I know," I said. "And I appreciate you saying that. But I need you to understand something. I've spent the last few years rebuilding my life, learning to stand on my own 2 feet again. And I'm not going to let anyone, not even you, take that away from me." He nodded, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I understand," he said. "And I'm not here to try to win you back or to ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve either of those things. I just wanted to see you, to tell you in person how sorry I am and to let you know that I've changed. I'm not the same man I was when I hurt you." We talked for hours, catching up on the years we'd missed and slowly, tentatively, finding our way back to a place of understanding and respect. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the old wounds threatened to reopen, when the anger and the hurt came rushing back to the surface. But as we talked, I began to realize something. The man sitting across from me wasn't the same man who'd broken my heart all those years ago. He'd grown and changed just as I had, and while the scars of our past would always be there, they no longer defined us. And so, as the sun began to set outside the coffee shop window, I made a decision. I reached across the table and took his hand in mine, my voice steady and clear as I spoke. "I forgive you," I said, the words feeling strange and unfamiliar on my tongue. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of the anger and the pain that's been weighing me down for so long. I'm ready to move on, to leave the past behind and start living for myself again." He nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears as he squeezed my hand. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea how much that means to me." We hugged then, a brief, tentative embrace that felt like the closing of a chapter and the beginning of something new. And as we walked out of the coffee shop and into the fading light of the evening, I felt a sense of peace wash over me, a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Forgiveness was a process, not a destination, and I knew there would still be days when the old pain and anger would come creeping back in. But I also knew that I was strong enough to face whatever challenges lay ahead, that I had the tools and the resilience to keep moving forward no matter what life threw my way. And so, as I walked down the street and into the bustling heart of the city, I felt a smile spreading across my face, a sense of joy and excitement bubbling up inside me. The final chapter of my story was just beginning, and I couldn't wait to see where it would take me. I knew there would be ups and downs, twists and turns that I could never see coming. But I also knew that I was ready for whatever lay ahead, because I was no longer defined by my past, by the choices and the mistakes that had once threatened to break me. I was my own woman now, strong and brave and full of hope for the future. And nothing and no one could ever take that away from me again. As I rounded the corner and stepped out into the waiting world, I felt a sense of endless possibilities stretching out before me, a world of opportunities and adventures just waiting to be explored. And I knew with a certainty that filled me from head to toe, that I was ready to embrace it all, the good and the bad, the joys and the sorrows, the laughter and the tears. Because this was my life, my story, my final chapter. And I was going to make it one hell of a ride. On the day I filed for divorce, my husband laughed and said, "You'll never survive without me." He watched me walk away, confident I'd come crawling back. But months later, he saw me on TV, not as a broken woman, but as a culinary empire builder who turned his mockery into Michelin stars. The divorce papers feel heavy in my hands as David's laughter bounces off the courthouse walls. A restaurant? You? He adjusts his Rolex, a gift he bought himself with our joint savings. You'll never make it in the culinary world, Amanda. You're just a home cook playing pretend. I touch the worn spine of my grandmother's recipe book in my bag, already tasting the sweet flavor of the success to come. Before we begin, here's a story about turning life's bitter ingredients into a masterpiece of success. If you've ever been told you can't, this journey from kitchen prison to culinary empire will inspire your own story. Subscribe to cook up your dreams. Let's dive in. His laugh follows me down the marble corridor, a sound I've grown to despise over our 8-year marriage. A sound that accompanied every denied credit card transaction, every budget discussion that left me feeling smaller than the garnishes he criticized on my plates. The same laugh that echoed through our designer kitchen when I dared to mention culinary school. Need some spending money, darling? David's voice drips with condescension as he pulls out his wallet. The gesture makes my blood boil. It's the same routine he's performed countless times in front of our friends, playing the role of the generous husband. But I know better now. Each dollar came with strings attached, each purchase scrutinized in his meticulously kept spreadsheets. I remember the day I discovered the truth about our finances. It wasn't the expensive watches or the golf club memberships that broke me. It was finding the bank statement showing he'd spent $5,000 on a wine tasting course for himself the same week he'd denied me $200 for basic cooking supplies. "We need to be practical with our money, Amanda," he'd said then. "Cooking classes are a waste of our resources." Our resources. The word tastes bitter now. 8 years of having to justify every grocery purchase, of watching him swipe our joint credit card for business dinners while I clipped coupons for basic ingredients. 8 years of shared finances that somehow never seemed to share anything with me. The judge was quite generous with the settlement, wasn't he? David's voice carries down the hallway. "But we both know you won't last 3 months without access to my accounts. Running a restaurant requires business sense, dear. Something you clearly lack." My fingers trace the embossed cover of my grandmother's recipe book, safely hidden in my bag. He never understood why I kept this outdated collection of peasant food, as he called it. Never noticed how I documented every financial slight, every withdrawn amount, every suspicious transaction in its margins. Between recipes for coq au vin and beef bourguignon, I built my case ingredient by ingredient. "I've frozen all our joint accounts," he calls out, his voice echoing off the walls. "Standard procedure, you understand. Can't have you making any rash decisions with our money." I turn, meeting his gaze for the final time. Our asterisk money, David? You mean the $300,000 you've been siphoning from our joint account into your private offshore account? The one you thought I didn't know about? The smirk falls from his face. Or perhaps you mean the secret account you opened in the Caymans. The one where you've been hiding your bonus money for the past 5 years. His face pales slightly, the Rolex catching the fluorescent light as his hand falls to his side. For the first time, there's no laughter, no condescending smile. "How did you? 8 years of controlling every penny I spent taught me a lot about tracking money, David. You should have let me take that accounting course I wanted. Might have helped me miss some of those transactions you were hiding." I pull out a folder from my bag, watching his eyes widen as he recognizes his own bank statements. The judge found these quite interesting during the private hearing last week. As did the IRS agent I spoke with. The sound of my heels clicking against the marble floor is sweeter than any kitchen timer as I walk away. Behind me, I hear him frantically pulling out his phone, no doubt calling his accountant. But it's too late. The accounts he'd used to control me for years have become the ingredients of his downfall. My hand rests on the courthouse door, feeling the weight of freedom beyond it. "Oh, and David?" I turn one last time, savoring the panic in his eyes. "Thank you for teaching me the value of keeping such detailed records. It's a skill that will serve me well in running my restaurant." The sunlight hits my face as I step outside, warming me like the heat of a professional kitchen. In my bag, my grandmother's recipe book holds more than just culinary secrets. It contains proof of every financial manipulation, every hidden account, every lie he fed me along with his criticism of my cooking. David thought he was keeping me confined to our home kitchen, but he really just taught me how to cook up the perfect revenge. My first apartment after leaving David could fit inside our old kitchen. The stovetop has 2 functioning burners, the oven door needs a gentle hip check to close properly, and the countertop is barely wide enough for a cutting board. But it's mine. Every scratched surface, every temperamental appliance belongs to me. The position at Le Petit Jardin isn't glamorous. My hands stay submerged in soapy water for 8-hour shifts, scrubbing pots and pans that others use to create culinary masterpieces. But between the steam and suds I watch, I learn. Every evening I memorize the rhythm of the kitchen, the dance of line cooks moving from station to station, the precise way Chef Marcus plates each dish. "You missed a spot," Chef Marcus says one evening, pointing to a copper pan I've just finished. But there's a glimmer in his eye as he watches me rewash it. "You're different from other dishwashers, Amanda. You watch the cooking more than the dishes." That night after my shift, I pull out the culinary school application I've hidden in my grandmother's recipe book. My hands tremble as I fill it out, remembering David's mocking voice. But the memory only strengthens my resolve. The registration fee takes half my first paycheck, but as I slip the envelope into the mailbox, I feel lighter than puff pastry. The night classes are exhausting. I rush from Le Petit Jardin to the Culinary Institute, still smelling of dish soap, changing into my student chef whites in fluorescent-lit bathroom stalls. My knife skills are rusty, my hollandaise splits twice, but with each mistake I feel more alive than I ever did in David's pristine kitchen. "Your brunoise needs work," my instructor says, examining my diced vegetables. "But your determination." She smiles, noting how I've stayed an hour after class to perfect the technique. "That's something we can't teach." Word spreads through the restaurant that the dishwasher is a culinary student. The line cooks start leaving small tasks for me: herbs to chop, sauces to stir, vegetables to prep. Each task feels like a victory, a step further from David's suffocating control. One quiet Tuesday evening, Chef Marcus catches me experimenting with a sauce recipe from my grandmother's book. I freeze, expecting to be reprimanded for using kitchen resources after hours. Instead, he takes a taste. "Interesting," he murmurs, rolling the flavors over his tongue. "Traditional base, but you've added something. Lemongrass? And is that star anise?" He studies my face. "How would you feel about coming in early tomorrow? We need a new prep cook. The promotion means less money. Prep cooks make less than dishwashers." But I accept without hesitation. That night I add another entry to my journal: Prep cook Le Petit Jardin. Below it I sketch out the next 5 years of my plan, each step taking me closer to my own restaurant. A week later, a familiar face appears at the restaurant's bar. Sarah, David's secretary. My heart stops until I realize she's alone, nursing a glass of wine. She doesn't notice me behind the kitchen door as she chats with the bartender. "Did you hear about David Matthews?" she says, loud enough for me to catch. "The IRS audit is tearing his firm apart. He's barely holding it together, showing up to meetings looking like he hasn't slept in days." I turn back to my prep station, a small smile playing on my lips as I dice onions with newfound precision. The tears in my eyes aren't just from the vegetables. They're tears of vindication, of freedom, of possibilities blooming like fresh herbs in spring. That evening I stay late again, experimenting with a fusion of my grandmother's classical French techniques and the Asian ingredients I'm discovering at the local markets. Chef Marcus watches silently as I plate the dish. A traditional coq au vin reimagined with lemongrass, star anise and a ginger-infused sauce. "You know," he says, tasting the dish, "there's a local cooking competition coming up. Small stakes but good exposure. Your technique needs polish, but this..." He gestures to the plate. "This is something different. Something personal." I think of David, probably sitting in his empty mansion, surrounded by takeout containers now that there's no one to cook for him. Meanwhile I'm here, my hands raw from work, my feet aching from standing, but my spirit soaring with each new recipe I master. "Sign me up," I say, already imagining the dishes I'll create. In my grandmother's recipe book, between the food-stained pages and financial records that brought down my ex-husband, I begin planning my competition menu. Each dish will tell a story. My story of breaking free and finding my own flavor in the world. The local cooking competition changes everything. Under the harsh spotlight of the competition kitchen, I plate my grandmother's reimagined coq au vin with trembling hands. The fusion of French tradition and Asian influences that seemed so natural in Le Petit Jardin's quiet kitchen now feels audacious under the judge's scrutinizing gaze. Next contestant, Amanda Matthews. The announcer begins. Carter, I interrupt firmly. Amanda Carter. Reclaiming my maiden name feels like shedding an ill-fitting chef's coat. The head judge, celebrity chef Jean-Michel Laurent, raises an eyebrow at my correction before turning his attention to my dish. The silence as he takes the first bite seems eternal. I watch his expression, remembering all the times David dismissed this very recipe as amateur home cooking. Chef Laurent's fork pauses midway to his mouth for a second taste. Miss Carter, he says, his French accent wrapping around my restored name. This is intriguing. The addition of Asian elements to a classical French dish could have been catastrophic. Instead, he takes another bite. Instead, you've created something entirely new while honoring the original. Tell me, where did you learn to cook like this? Before I can answer, a commotion near the entrance catches my attention. David stands there, looking expensive and out of place among the food service professionals. He's holding a local newspaper, and I can see my name in the headline of the food section. Le Petit Jardin's rising star enters regional competition. The base recipe was my grandmother's, I say, turning back to the judges, my voice stronger now. She taught me that tradition is a foundation, not a prison. The Asian influences come from my own experiments, my own journey to find my culinary voice. I win second place overall, but first in innovation. The local food critics are particularly taken with my fusion approach. As I accept my certificate and a modest cash prize, I catch David's expression, a mixture of disbelief and something else. Something that looks almost like regret. The next morning, Chef Marcus promotes me to line cook. Your station, he says, gesturing to a spot on the line that's now mine. Don't make me regret this. But his proud smile betrays his gruff tone. Word spreads quickly in the restaurant community. Local food bloggers start requesting my fusion dishes specifically. One evening, a well-dressed woman sits at the chef's table, watching me work with unusual intensity. The woman at table 7, Chef Marcus whispers during a lull, that's Catherine Lin. She owns 3 of the most successful fusion restaurants in the city. After service, Catherine asks to speak with me. Over late-night coffee, she talks about investment opportunities, about a restaurant scene ready for something new. Your competition dish, she says, it showed something rare, respect for tradition and courage to innovate. I'd be interested in discussing a business partnership. That night, I add another entry to my journal. Potential investor Catherine Lin. The entry sits just below the newspaper clipping of my competition win. Its headline a sweet validation. Home cook turns heads with innovative fusion cuisine. As my reputation grows, so does my confidence. I begin experimenting more boldly during off hours, blending my grandmother's time-tested techniques with flavors from across Asia. Each successful dish feels like a step further from David's shadow. Each positive review a brick in the foundation of my future. Then comes the night that changes everything. An influential food critic arrives unannounced at Le Petit Jardin. Chef Marcus is out sick, and suddenly I'm in charge of preparing my signature dish for someone whose reviews can make or break careers. As I plate the dish, my grandmother's coq au vin now confidently transformed with lemongrass, galangal, and a sauce that took months to perfect. I think of all the times David laughed at my culinary ambitions. The critic's review comes out a week later and it's glowing. She specifically mentions my bold yet respectful fusion of classical French technique with Asian influences. The day the review is published, I arrive at work to find Catherine Lin waiting. I've secured a location, she says without preamble. If you're ready to take the next step. That evening after service, I find an email from David's new girlfriend. She's booked a table at Le Petit Jardin, having no idea of my connection. The irony makes me smile. The woman who replaced me in his mansion wants to taste the food of the woman he said would never be more than a home cook. I look around at my station, at the tools that have become extensions of my hands, at the team that has become my family. Soon this will all belong to my past as I step into my future. I open my grandmother's recipe book, its pages now stuffed with critics' reviews alongside her handwritten notes, and begin planning my own restaurant's menu. Tomorrow I'll give notice to Chef Marcus. Tomorrow I'll begin the next chapter. But tonight I have one more service to run, one more chance to prove that the best revenge isn't served cold. It's served with passion, with skill, and with the quiet confidence of a woman who has finally found her true flavor. The space that will become Heritage Modern stands empty before me, its industrial kitchen waiting to be filled with life. Catherine walks beside me, her heels clicking on the concrete floor as we discuss renovation plans. The building has good bones, as they say in real estate, but it needs work. Much like I did when I first left David. The previous tenant was a failed Italian restaurant, Catherine explains, running her hand along the stainless steel counters. But I see something different here. Something uniquely. She pulls out the preliminary designs, showing where the open kitchen will face the dining room. Your customers should see you work. It's part of the story. The story. My story. It unfolds in my mind as we walk through the space. Exposed brick walls that will showcase vintage cooking implements, windows that will flood the dining room with natural light, and most importantly, an open kitchen where I can demonstrate that fusion cuisine isn't just about mixing flavors. It's about bridging worlds. The renovation begins, and with it the social media campaign Catherine insists upon. Your journey is marketable, she says, showing me the engagement numbers on our first video post. It's a simple clip of me demonstrating my grandmother's technique for rolling out pastry dough, but with my addition of Asian 5-spice to the traditional French recipe. The comments section fills with eager anticipation. Then comes the message that makes my heart skip. A reservation request from Rachel, David's new girlfriend. She's seen the construction updates on Instagram, drawn in by the promise of traditional techniques reimagined. She has no idea she's booking a table at her boyfriend's ex-wife's restaurant. Should we accept it? My host asks, recognizing the name from office gossip. I smile, remembering David's words about my cooking being fit only for family dinners. Accept it. And put them at the chef's table. The irony is too delicious to resist. The renovation continues at a frantic pace. Each day brings new challenges. Permit delays, equipment malfunctions, supplier issues. But I handle each crisis with the same precision I use to plate my dishes. David's financial abuse taught me one valuable lesson. Attention to detail matters. Local food critics begin circling as opening day approaches. My Instagram followers multiply after a video of me preparing my signature fusion dishes goes viral in the culinary community. The hashtag #HeritageMeetsModern starts trending in local foodie groups. Then comes the call that changes everything. A prestigious culinary magazine wants to feature Heritage Modern in their Ones to Watch section. The photographer arrives on a Wednesday, capturing images of me in the nearly completed kitchen, my grandmother's recipe book prominently displayed on a custom-built shelf above my station. Tell us about your inspiration, the writer asks, notebook ready. I run my fingers along the worn cover of the recipe book. This restaurant is about transformation, I explain. About taking what you're given and making it into something stronger, something uniquely yours. The writer's pen scratches across paper, capturing words that I once wouldn't have dared to speak. The night before our soft opening, I receive an unexpected delivery. A bottle of expensive champagne from Chef Marcus with a note. From dishwasher to restaurateur. Show them what you're made of. Opening night arrives in a blur of activity. The kitchen hums with energy as my hand-picked team moves through their stations. The dining room fills with food critics, local celebrities, and curious foodies drawn by the social media buzz. And there at the chef's table sit Rachel and David. I watch through the open kitchen as David realizes whose restaurant he's entered. His face pales as he recognizes me, confident and in command, directing my kitchen with the authority he once tried to strip from me. Rachel, oblivious to the tension, excitedly points to my signature dish on the menu. The very same coq au vin fusion that won the competition. Chef, my sous chef calls out, the first orders are coming in. I straighten my chef's coat, the embroidered Heritage Modern logo gleaming under the kitchen lights. Fire first course for table 7, I command, my voice strong and sure. From my vantage point at the pass, I can see David squirming uncomfortably as each exquisitely plated dish leaves my kitchen. The evening unfolds like a perfectly executed recipe. Each dish tells part of my story. from the amuse-bouche inspired by my grandmother's kitchen to the dessert that blends French technique with Asian flavors in ways that make traditionalists gasp and innovators applaud. As the final dishes leave the kitchen, I step into the dining room to greet my guests. The applause starts softly then builds. Even David, despite himself, looks impressed. But it's not his approval I seek anymore. I've found something far more valuable. My own voice, my own style, my own success. Rachel waves me over, enthusiasm shining in her eyes. Chef Carter, this is the most amazing meal I've ever had. Behind her, David stares at his empty plate, perhaps finally tasting the flavor of his own words. The morning after opening night, my phone buzzes incessantly with notifications. Heritage Modern is trending locally, food critics are posting rave reviews, and reservation requests are flooding our system. But it's the email from the major cooking network that makes my hands tremble. We'd love to feature you on Rising Star Chefs, the producer writes. Your story of transformation through cuisine is exactly what we're looking for. The irony doesn't escape me. The same network where David used to watch celebrity chefs while criticizing my amateur cooking now wants to showcase my culinary innovations. I signed the contract in the same office where I once signed my divorce papers, my signature now flowing with confidence rather than fear. The film crew arrives on a Tuesday, transforming Heritage Modern into a television set. Under the bright lights, I demonstrate my signature fusion techniques, sharing stories of my grandmother's influence while creating dishes that bridge continents and generations. And this recipe book, the host says, carefully handling my grandmother's treasured collection, it's more than just recipes, isn't it? I nod, thinking of the financial records hidden between its pages that helped free me from David's control. It's my heritage, my history, and my future all bound together. Every stain, every dog-eared page tells a story of transformation. The segment airs on a Thursday evening. I watch it with my kitchen team after service, all of us crowded around the bar's television. The cameras capture everything. The confident way I move through my kitchen, the precision of my knife work, the artistic plating that makes guests gasp. Chef Carter's journey from home cook to culinary innovator is a testament to perseverance, the host's voiceover declares. Her unique fusion of traditional French techniques with Asian influences is revolutionizing the local dining scene. My phone buzzes with a text from Catherine. Check your email. Now. The James Beard Foundation has taken notice. They're considering me for their Rising Star Chef nomination. The same award David once told me I'd never be qualified to even dream about. Heritage Modern's success spawns immediate expansion opportunities. Catherine's investors are eager to open a second location, then a third. Each new restaurant maintains the core concept while developing its own unique character. My grandmother's recipes, reimagined through my contemporary lens, now reach thousands. The day my cookbook deal is announced, David's new girlfriend Rachel makes another reservation at Heritage Modern. This time she comes alone. Over my tasting menu, she confides that she left him. Watching you on that cooking show, she says, savoring my 5-spice soufflé, made me realize I was letting him control my dreams too. My appearance on Rising Star Chefs leads to an offer to judge a major cooking competition show. The contract arrives the same day as the first advance copy of my cookbook, Heritage Modern, Traditions Reimagined. The dedication page reads, "For my grandmother who taught me that recipes like life are meant to be adapted." The morning of my first filming day as a judge, I arrive at the studio early. In the green room mirror, I straighten my chef's coat, now emblazoned with both my restaurant's logo and the network's emblem. The producer hands me my judging criteria sheet, and I think of all the times David judged my cooking without any criteria except his own need for control. 5 minutes to places. A PA calls out. As I walk onto the set, the studio lights warming my face, I spot a familiar figure in the contestant lineup. It's David's personal chef, the one he hired after I left, looking nervous in his pristine whites. He recognizes me, and I see the moment he realizes I'll be judging his food. I take my seat at the judges' panel, remembering the day I sat before a different judge, clutching divorce papers and financial records. Now, I'm the one holding the power to judge, but unlike David, I'll do it with the expertise I've earned and the compassion I've learned. Welcome to MasterChef's Challenge, the host announces to the cameras. Please welcome our guest judge, celebrated restaurateur and culinary innovator, Chef Amanda Carter. The applause washes over me like the steam from a perfect stock pot, and I can't help but smile. Somewhere in the city, in his empty mansion with its gleaming untouched kitchen, David might be watching. But his opinion, like his control over my life, has simmered away to nothing. I open my notebook ready to taste and evaluate. My grandmother's recipe book sits in my bag, no longer a hiding place for evidence, but a source of inspiration for the future. The first contestant approaches with their dish, and I lift my fork, ready to judge with the wisdom of someone who has learned that the best recipes, like the best revenge, require patience, precision, and passion. The irony isn't lost on me as I sign the lease for Heritage Modern's newest location. A beautiful historic building that was once owned by David's family. His father had sold it years ago, and now, through a twist of fate that tastes sweeter than my finest desserts, it's becoming the flagship restaurant of my expanding culinary empire. The renovation will take 6 months, my project manager explains, rolling out the blueprints across what will become our show kitchen. We'll preserve the historic elements while incorporating your signature modern touches. My cookbook, Heritage Modern, Traditions Reimagined, sits at the top of the culinary bestseller lists for the 3rd consecutive week. The morning talk shows can't get enough of my story. The home cook who transformed herself into a culinary powerhouse. During one interview, the host pulls up an old social media post where David had mockingly commented on my cooking ambitions. "How does it feel to prove the doubters wrong?" she asks. I smile, thinking of my grandmother's recipe book, now safely preserved in a custom display case in my original restaurant. "Success isn't about proving others wrong," I reply. "It's about proving yourself right." The expansion continues at a dizzying pace. 3 new Heritage Modern locations open across the city, each with its own unique character but maintaining the core concept that made us famous. The perfect fusion of traditional techniques with contemporary innovation. Then comes the invitation that brings everything full circle. The International Culinary Institute, the same school that sent me an acceptance letter years ago, the one David had hidden, wants me to be their commencement speaker. Standing at the podium facing a sea of fresh-faced culinary students, I spot a familiar face in the crowd. Rachel, David's ex-girlfriend, now pursuing her own culinary dreams. "Your journey begins here," I tell the graduates, "but your story? That's been simmering inside you all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge." The Food Network offers me my own show, a weekly series called Modern Heritage Kitchen. Each episode features me teaching home cooks how to elevate traditional recipes with modern techniques. The pilot episode showcases my grandmother's coco vin, the dish that started it all. During filming, a production assistant hands me a note. "David has been trying to make a reservation at the new flagship location. He's called every day this week," she whispers. "Says he's willing to pay any price." I think about it for a moment, remembering the days when he controlled every aspect of my life, including my access to our kitchen. Tell him we're fully booked, I decide. For the next 3 years. The day my flagship location opens in his family's former building, I receive a massive flower arrangement. The card reads, "Congratulations on everything." I was wrong. David. I remove a single rose from the arrangement and place it in a bud vase on my grandmother's recipe book display. The rest I send to the women's shelter where I now teach monthly cooking classes. Some ingredients I've learned are better repurposed. My story makes the cover of Food and Wine magazine. The photo shoot takes place in my new flagship kitchen, where the photographer captures me in my element, creating, innovating, leading. The article title reads, "Amanda Carter, Rewriting the Recipe for Success." That evening after the photo shoot, I walk through my empty restaurant, running my hands along the smooth countertops. The space that once belonged to David's family now pulses with my energy, my vision, my success. In the window, I catch my reflection. No longer the hesitant home cook afraid of criticism, but a confident chef who has earned her place in the culinary world. On the wall, next to my grandmother's displayed recipe book, hangs my collection of accolades. The James Beard nomination, the Michelin recognition, the glowing reviews. But it's the small frame holding my first paycheck as a dishwasher that means the most. It reminds me of where this journey began. A knock at the door interrupts my reverie. It's Catherine, holding a bottle of champagne. "Have you seen the numbers?" she asks, grinning. Your restaurant group just outperformed David's entire investment portfolio for the quarter. We share a laugh as we toast to success, but I'm not celebrating his failure. I'm celebrating my victory, not over him, but over the voice of doubt he once planted in my head. In my kitchen empire, I found something far more valuable than revenge. I've found myself. As the sun sets through the windows of what was once his family's building, I begin preparing for tomorrow's service. Each dish I create now tells a story of transformation, of resilience, of tradition reimagined. And the best part? This is just the beginning. The morning my assistant tells me that Heritage Modern is going international, I'm in the middle of filming the season finale of Modern Heritage Kitchen. The news nearly makes me drop the whisk I'm using to demonstrate my grandmother's revised crème anglaise technique. Dubai, London, and Singapore want to franchise, she whispers between takes. They love how you've modernized traditional techniques while respecting their essence. The expansion happens faster than a reduction sauce over high heat. Each new Heritage Modern location adapts to its city while maintaining our core philosophy. In Dubai, we infuse Middle Eastern spices into French classics. London embraces our fusion of British puddings with Asian elements. Singapore celebrates the marriage of Peranakan flavors with European techniques. David, I hear through the restaurant grapevine, has attempted to open his own restaurant, a pretentious French bistro that closes within 6 months. The irony of his failure in the industry he once mocked me for pursuing isn't lost on me, but I'm too busy to dwell on it. Your story inspired me, a young chef tells me during a kitchen interview. She's applying for a position at our new culinary school, a program specifically designed for survivors of domestic abuse. I watched your journey from home cook to restaurant mogul while I was planning my own escape. You showed me it was possible. The culinary school becomes my passion project. Each student receives not just cooking training, but business education, financial literacy, and mentorship. We name it the Phoenix Institute, because everyone deserves the chance to rise from their ashes. On the day we open the school, I receive an unexpected email from David's mother. I should have spoken up when I saw how he treated you, she writes. Your success is well-deserved and your grandmother would be proud. My grandmother's recipe book, now carefully preserved and digitized, becomes part of the curriculum at the Phoenix Institute. Each student learns not just the techniques but the story behind them, how recipes, like people, can adapt and evolve while keeping their essential truth. The Food Network airs a special documentary about my journey. They film me walking through my original tiny apartment, visiting Le Petit Jardin where Chef Marcus still runs the kitchen, and finally standing in my international flagship restaurant. The cameras capture the moment I place my grandmother's original recipe book in its permanent display case. This book, I tell the interviewer, running my fingers along its protected cover, taught me that recipes are like life. They're meant to be tested, adapted, and passed on. Every modification makes them stronger, more resilient. The day the documentary airs, my phone buzzes with a text from Rachel, David's ex-girlfriend who graduated from our first culinary school class. She's opening her own cafe in Seattle, specializing in artisanal pastries. You showed me that the kitchen isn't a prison, she writes. It's a launch pad. Heritage Modern's 20th location opens in Paris, the birthplace of the culinary techniques my grandmother taught me. During the opening ceremony, a Michelin-starred French chef praises our innovative approach to classical cuisine. You have not destroyed tradition, he says in accented English. You have given it new life. That evening after the celebrations, I find myself alone in the Paris kitchen. The space gleams with potential, much like that first small apartment kitchen where I began my journey. On the wall, a photo of my grandmother watches over the pass, her smile seeming to approve of how far her recipes have traveled. My phone pings with a notification. David has given an interview to a local business magazine about his failed restaurant venture. I didn't understand that cooking is more than following recipes, he admits. My ex-wife taught me that, though too late. I closed the article without finishing it. His words, like his presence in my life, have lost their power to affect me. Instead, I open my notes to review tomorrow's special, a dish that combines my grandmother's coq au vin with techniques I've learned from chefs across 3 continents. As I test the sauce one final time, adjusting the seasoning with the confidence of someone who has found her true calling, I smile at the memory of that courthouse day when David laughed at my dreams. His mockery, meant to be a prison sentence, became the key to my freedom. In the quiet of my Paris kitchen, surrounded by the legacy of both my grandmother's traditions and my own innovations, I realized that success isn't just about proving doubters wrong. It's about proving yourself right, one dish at a time. The best revenge, after all, isn't just served cold. It's served with passion, with purpose, and with the quiet confidence of a woman who has learned to trust her own taste. I just want to say something to all women who want to pursue their dreams or follow their passion. Your dreams aren't meant to gather dust on a shelf someone else built. Whether it's a controlling partner, crushing self-doubt, or societal pressure holding you back, remember that every master chef started by boiling water. Every CEO began with a single idea. Every artist first picked up a beginner's brush. Start small. Start messy. Start scared. But most importantly, start today. Your passion is a pilot light waiting to ignite. Don't let anyone convince you it's too late, too hard, or too ambitious. The only ingredients you need are courage and that first step. Remember, the same fire that burns you can also forge you into something extraordinary. Your story isn't written by your past. It's written by every small step you take today towards tomorrow. My stepmother convinced my father to cut me from his will. Your daughter is unstable and would waste everything you've built, she insisted. I was homeless for 3 months before fighting my way up. At my father's funeral, the lawyer revealed a second will. My stepmother's smile vanished as security footage from his hospital room played. I don't understand what you're saying. There must be some mistake. The lawyer's voice echoed through the funeral home as he pulled out a second will, dated just 1 day before my father's death. Victoria's triumphant smile vanished instantly. The security footage from my father's hospital room appeared on the TV screen, and 5 years of carefully orchestrated vengeance finally came full circle. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to where it all began. The day I lost everything. It started with a single misplaced file folder. I wasn't supposed to be in my father's home office that afternoon. Robert Matthews, CEO of Matthews Enterprises, kept his work life separate from home. A rule that had only strengthened since he married Victoria 3 years ago. But Dad had asked me to pick up some documents he'd forgotten, giving me his private office key with specific instructions to grab the blue folder labeled Rockwell Proposal, and nothing else. That's when I saw it, a red folder marked Cayman Transfer, peeking out from beneath his blotter. The flap had come open, revealing transfer forms with Victoria's elegant signature beside unfamiliar company names. Numbers with too many zeros. Dates that aligned perfectly with unexplained dips in company projections I'd seen in quarterly reports. My hands trembled as I took photos with my phone. The amounts totaled over $3.2 million transferred to offshore accounts. My stepmother, the woman who'd swept into our lives after Mom died, was systematically draining my father's company. What exactly do you think you're doing, Allison? I nearly dropped my phone. Victoria stood in the doorway, arms crossed over her designer blouse, her normally perfect smile replaced with something cold and calculating. These transfers, I said, holding up the folder. You're embezzling from Dad's company. She laughed, a tinkling sound that had always seemed charming until that moment. You really are your mother's daughter, aren't you? Always imagining conspiracies where there are none. These aren't imaginary, I insisted, pointing to the documents. Who's Bluewater Holdings? Why are company funds going to an account in your maiden name? Victoria's mask slipped momentarily, a flash of something dangerous in her eyes before she composed herself. Those are legitimate investments your father approved. The fact that you're sneaking around taking photos says more about your state of mind than my business dealings. Dad needs to see these. Yes, let's call him right now. She pulled out her phone, her voice shifting to something softer, vulnerable. Robert, darling, you need to come home. I'm worried about Allison. Yes, she's in your office going through confidential files. I know. She's making wild accusations. I'm scared, Robert. She reminds me of how her mother was before. The mention of my mother, who had struggled with depression before her death, was a calculated knife twist. By the time my father's car pulled into the driveway 20 minutes later, Victoria had transformed from calculating criminal to concerned stepmother, complete with worried eyes and a trembling hand pressed to her chest. Dad burst into the office, his face flushed with anger. Allison, what the hell is going on? Dad, she's stealing from the company. Look at these. I tried to hand him the folder, but Victoria gently intercepted it. Robert, I think she's having some kind of episode. Remember how Dr. Winters mentioned family history can be a factor? My father's expression changed from anger to concern. Allie, have you been taking your medication? What medication? Dad, I'm not on any medication. See what I mean? Victoria whispered, just loud enough for me to hear. The denial is exactly how it started with Elizabeth. The family dinner that night was excruciating. Dad had insisted I stay, concerned about my state of mind. Victoria played her role perfectly, the caring stepmother worried about her troubled stepdaughter. Every time I tried to bring up the transfers, she would exchange glances with my father, who would change the subject. I've been thinking, Allie, he said as Victoria served coffee. Maybe you should take some time off. Focus on your health before jumping into the company. My health is fine, I insisted. Dad, you promised Mom before she died that I would have a place in Matthew's Enterprises. I've worked for this. My MBA, the internships, everything was to prepare me for this. Victoria set down her cup with a delicate clink. Robert, remember what Dr. Harrison said about stress as a trigger? What doctor? Dad, I haven't seen any doctor. My father reached for Victoria's hand. Allie, we've noticed some concerning behaviors. The paranoia, the mood swings. Victoria's brother is a psychiatrist. He recommended someone who specializes in cases like yours. Cases like mine? Dad, she's manipulating you. There are no doctors. There are no concerning behaviors. She's stealing from you and turning you against me. The outburst sealed my fate. Victoria's eyes welled with perfectly timed tears. Just like Elizabeth, she whispered. The accusations, the anger. Robert, I'm frightened for her. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from my father's attorney. I had been removed from his will, cut off from my trust fund, and my position at Matthew's Enterprises had been indefinitely postponed. The letter cited concerns about my mental stability and included recommendations for several psychiatric facilities. That same afternoon, I found my apartment locks changed. My calls to my father went straight to voicemail. My bank accounts had been frozen due to suspicious activity. Credit cards declined. Even my childhood home's security system no longer recognized my fingerprint. Night fell as I sat in my car in the parking lot of a 24-hour diner, scrolling through my contacts for someone, anyone, who might take me in. But Victoria had been thorough. Friends received calls about my breakdown. Extended family heard I was entering treatment. Former classmates were told I'd had a disturbing episode. I counted the cash in my wallet. $43. The first heavy drops of rain hit my windshield as I reclined the driver's seat as far as it would go and tried to get comfortable. In less than a week, I had gone from corporate heir to homeless, with nothing but my car, 2 suitcases, and an accusation no one believed. I didn't cry that night. Something inside me had hardened into resolve. Victoria had taken everything from me. My father, my inheritance, my home, my reputation. But she had made one critical mistake. She had left me alive to fight back. Morning light filtered through my car windows as I jolted awake, momentarily confused by my surroundings. Reality crashed back. This wasn't a nightmare. This was my life now. I straightened my wrinkled blouse and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. Dark circles had formed under my eyes, but I couldn't afford to look defeated. Not when I needed to find work immediately. The first week was brutal. I rationed my $43 for essentials while sleeping in my car, parking in different spots each night to avoid attention. I showered at a 24-hour gym using a trial membership, washing my interview clothes in bathroom sinks and drying them over the back seat. Each morning, I'd put on my one professional outfit and head to cafes with free Wi-Fi to search for jobs and send applications. By week 2, my car became a liability, eating gas money I couldn't spare. I reluctantly left it in long-term airport parking, gathering what I could carry in a single suitcase. That night, I swallowed my pride and checked into a women's shelter downtown. "First time?" asked an older woman named Grace as she showed me to a narrow cot. I nodded, fighting back tears. "Keep your shoes under your pillow and your important papers on you at all times," she advised. "And honey, that designer watch. Trade it for something cheaper before someone makes that decision for you." I traded my watch, a college graduation gift from my father, For a basic timepiece, some cash and a prepaid phone. The transaction felt like selling another piece of my former self, but sentiment wouldn't keep me fed. The shelter had a 3-week maximum stay. I used every minute strategically, volunteering in their office to maintain my administrative skills, using their address for job applications, and networking with social workers who knew of temporary opportunities. "You're overqualified for everything you're applying for," remarked the shelter's career counselor after reviewing my resume. "MBA from Wharton, internships at Goldman Sachs. Why aren't you aiming higher?" I couldn't tell her the truth, that Victoria's influence had blacklisted me from financial firms across the city. Each interview ended the same way: polite smiles followed by rejection emails citing more suitable candidates. One interviewer had even mentioned hearing about my personal struggles, a clear reference to Victoria's rumors. When my shelter time expired, I bounced between a weekly rate motel and a church basement program, taking odd jobs to survive: office temping, inventory at retail stores, even dog walking for busy executives. Each paycheck went toward keeping up appearances, maintaining my cell service, dry cleaning my interview outfit, printing resumes on quality paper. 74 days into my new reality, I was nursing a coffee at a diner, stretching it out to justify using their Wi-Fi, when someone slid into the booth across from me. "I thought that was you," said a familiar voice. I looked up to see Janet Collins, my father's executive assistant of 15 years, until Victoria had her replaced with her own college roommate. "Janet," I whispered, instinctively glancing around. "I can't be seen with you." "If Victoria, I don't work for your father anymore, remember?" Janet's eyes softened as she took in my appearance. "And from the looks of it, neither do you." Over the next hour, I told her everything: the discovered documents, Victoria's manipulation, my current situation. Janet listened without interruption, occasionally nodding as pieces fell into place. "I always knew something was off about her," Janet said finally. "The way company funds were being reallocated, the new consultants, with no qualifications, how she isolated your father from longtime employees." "No one would believe me," I said, staring into my cold coffee. "I believe you," Janet replied, reaching for her purse. She slid a business card across the table. "I'm at Meridian Corp now. Junior VP of Operations. We have an executive assistant position opening in the finance department next week. It's entry-level, beneath your qualifications, but—" "I'll take it," I interrupted, hope flaring for the first time in months. Janet nodded. "Use my name but not your connection to your father. Victoria's been thorough about spreading stories. Come by Monday 9 a.m. sharp." The Meridian interview was rigorous despite Janet's recommendation. I used my mother's maiden name, Walker, claiming my experience was primarily on the West Coast. The salary was modest, but when they offered me the position, I nearly wept with relief. My first paycheck went toward a room in a women's transitional housing program, a step up from shelters with a private bedroom but shared kitchen and bathroom. The place had strict rules: curfew, mandatory financial counseling, no male visitors. But it offered stability and a legitimate address. At Meridian, I kept my head down, arriving early and staying late. I befriended the IT staff by bringing coffee and homemade cookies, baked during my allocated kitchen time at the housing program. I had lunch with accounting clerks, chatted with security guards, and volunteered for tasks no one else wanted. Slowly, I built a network of allies who knew me only as Allison Walker, the hardworking assistant with a knack for numbers. No one connected me to Matthews Enterprises or my father. In their eyes, I was just another young professional starting from the bottom. 3 months into my job, I was reviewing reports for my boss when I noticed a discrepancy in the quarterly projections. A formula error had cascaded through the spreadsheet, inflating expected returns by nearly 12%, which would translate to millions when presented to investors. Instead of simply flagging it, I rebuilt the entire model, working through the night at my tiny desk in the shared housing. I arrived early the next morning and placed both versions on my manager's desk with a detailed explanation of the error and its potential impact. By afternoon, I'd been called to a meeting with the department head and CFO. My stomach knotted as I entered the conference room, certain I'd overstepped. "Ms. Walker," the CFO began, "you identified an error that would have cost this company approximately $7.3 million in misallocated resources." I nodded, hands clasped tightly in my lap. "And then," he continued, Instead of simply reporting it, you took the initiative to reconstruct the entire projection model, which frankly is superior to our current system. The department head leaned forward. We'd like to offer you a position as junior financial analyst, effective immediately. With appropriate salary adjustment, of course. As I walked out of that meeting, promotion letter in hand, I passed a conference room where a familiar face appeared on the video screen. Victoria was presenting at an industry event, standing beside my father who looked thinner, grayer than I remembered. My throat tightened but I kept walking. Victoria had taken everything from me once, but she'd made a critical miscalculation. She thought she'd broken me but she'd merely forced me to rebuild myself. Stronger, smarter, and perfectly positioned for what would come next. My promotion to junior financial analyst marked the beginning of a carefully calculated ascent. I moved out of transitional housing into a modest studio apartment 6 months later, gradually rebuilding a life that bore little resemblance to my previous one. I kept a single photo of my mother tucked in my wallet, my only visible connection to the past. Meridian became my battleground and sanctuary. I poured myself into each project, arriving first and leaving last. Quarterly reviews consistently rated me in the top percentile. By my first anniversary, I'd been promoted to senior analyst. 6 months later, I became assistant director of financial operations, a position that granted access to company-wide financial data. Through it all, I maintained my cover as Allison Walker, keeping a deliberately low social media presence and declining invitations to industry events where I might be recognized. My colleagues knew me as intensely private, attributed to a fictional bad breakup that Janet had helped establish as my backstory. "You're becoming our resident forensic accounting genius," my director commented one evening as I analyzed acquisition reports. "The way you find patterns most people miss. It's almost like you've seen these structures before." I had. Not just seen them, memorized them. Victoria's embezzlement schemes from my father's company had etched specific patterns into my memory. Shell companies with subtle naming conventions, irregular transfer schedules, legitimate-looking consulting fees that added up to significant sums. Late one night, 18 months into my Meridian career, I was reviewing acquisition proposals when I spotted it. Blue Water Holdings. The same Shell company from Victoria's Cayman transfers. My hands trembled as I pulled up additional documentation. There it was, the same signature pattern of financial movements but on a much larger scale. I began building a private database, working nights and weekends to document connections. Victoria wasn't just stealing from my father's company. She was orchestrating a complex web of financial manipulation across multiple corporations, including Meridian. The Shell companies connected to offshore accounts, which fed into investment trusts, which circled back to legitimate businesses, with Victoria's fingerprints carefully removed from all but the most obscure documentation. My breakthrough came when I discovered that 3 seemingly unrelated consulting firms, all recommended to different companies by Victoria, were registered to the same address in Luxembourg. Each firm charged substantial fees for strategic restructuring that inevitably directed resources toward companies within Victoria's hidden network. With my growing reputation at Meridian, I was assigned to the team preparing for the National Financial Operations Summit. The annual industry conference would host representatives from all major corporations in our sector, including Matthews Enterprises. "We need our best people front and center," my director instructed. "Allison, you'll present the efficiency model you developed." I wanted to refuse, but doing so would raise questions. Instead, I prepared meticulously, rehearsing my presentation while developing strategies to avoid my father and Victoria. The conference center buzzed with activity as I navigated through crowded halls, keeping my head down. I'd changed my appearance, darkened my naturally blonde hair to brown, adopted thick-framed glasses, and chosen subdued clothing that my former self would never have worn. Still, I constantly scanned for familiar faces. Midway through the afternoon sessions, I ducked into a service corridor for a moment of quiet. As I turned the corner, I collided with someone. "I'm sorry, I wasn't..." The words died in my throat. My father stood before me, briefcase in hand, looking startled by the collision. But what truly shocked me was his appearance. Robert Matthews, once robust and commanding, looked gaunt, his skin sallow, designer suit hanging loosely on his frame. Deep lines had etched themselves around his eyes, and his hair had gone completely gray. Recognition flickered across his face. Ali. I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. 2 years of careful anonymity shattered in an instant. I have to go, I stammered, turning to leave. Wait. His voice lacked its former authority, sounding almost fragile. Please. Something in his tone stopped me. I glanced around to ensure we were alone. 5 minutes, he said. The Wentworth Hotel bar across the street. 8 o'clock tonight. He pressed a key card into my palm. Room 1542. Come up the service elevator. Victoria's having dinner with investors until 10. Before I could respond, he continued down the corridor, shoulders stooped in a way I'd never seen before. 8 o'clock found me entering the service elevator of the Wentworth, stomach knotted with conflicting emotions. Part of me screamed this was a trap. Another part desperately wanted to see my father again. Room 1542 was a corner suite. My father opened the door at my soft knock, ushering me in quickly. Up close he looked even worse. Thinner, exhausted, his movements lacking their characteristic precision. You look different, he said, studying my appearance. But good. Healthy. You don't, I replied bluntly. He managed a shadow of his former smile. Direct as always. He gestured toward the sitting area. We don't have much time. I remained standing. Why am I here? To sign some psychological evaluation? Another document removing me from what little might be left of my inheritance. Pain flashed across his face. I deserve that. I deserve worse. He moved to the minibar, hands trembling slightly as he poured 2 fingers of scotch. I've been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 3 months, maybe 4. The news hit like a physical blow. Despite everything, this was my father. The man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had held me through my mother's funeral, who had been my hero before Victoria entered our lives. I'm sorry, I managed. I've been a fool, Ali. He took a long sip of scotch. For the past 8 months, I've been gathering evidence. Victoria's schemes, her manipulations, I see them now. My professional mask slipped. 8 months? I've been homeless, Dad. I slept in shelters in my car. I lost everything while you took 2 years to notice your wife is a criminal. I know. His voice cracked. When I finally started looking, really looking, I found the extent of what she's done. Not just to the company but to you. The rumors she spread, the doctors she claimed you'd seen. He set down his glass with a shaking hand. I hired investigators. They found you 6 months ago at Meridian. I've been following your career under your new name. You've done remarkably. My anger deflated slightly. Why not contact me sooner? I needed proof first. Evidence you weren't unstable, evidence of what Victoria's been doing. He moved to his briefcase, retrieving a thin file. She's more dangerous than you know, Ali. The financial schemes go beyond embezzlement. She's been systematically destabilizing competitor companies, including Meridian, while positioning herself to absorb the fallout. As I scanned the documents he provided, connections snapped into place. The missing pieces to the puzzle I'd been assembling. I'm dying, Allison, my father said quietly. But before I go, I'm going to make this right. My father and I developed a system to communicate safely. I purchased a prepaid phone under a false name, and we established code words and meeting locations. Though I initially resisted forgiving him, his deteriorating health and genuine remorse gradually softened my resolve. We didn't have time for extended reconciliation. Victoria's schemes were accelerating, and my father's condition was worsening by the week. She's gotten careless, my father explained during our third meeting, this time in a rarely used public library reading room. We sat in a secluded corner, documents spread between us. She thinks I'm too sick to notice the inconsistencies in company reports, the unusual transfers. She's not entirely wrong, I said, noting how his hands trembled as he passed me files. You need to conserve your strength. He shook his head stubbornly. I need to fix what I've done. To the company, to you. We established a rhythm. I'd analyze the financial data he smuggled out, comparing it with information from Meridian, building a comprehensive map of Victoria's operations. My father would document her behavior at home, noting conversations and suspicious activities. 2 weeks later, he introduced me to Marcus Haywood, his longtime head of security who had been quietly sidelined after Victoria's arrival. Marcus had maintained loyalty to my father, watching from the periphery as things deteriorated. Victoria replaced most of the household staff with her own people, Marcus explained as we met in his modest apartment. But she keeps me around for appearances. The loyal employee too close to retirement to fire without raising questions. Marcus became our most valuable asset. While Victoria focused on my father, Marcus moved invisibly through the house, installing miniature security cameras in common areas, my father's office and even the bedroom they shared. Nothing in bathrooms or private spaces, my father insisted. We're gathering evidence, not becoming voyeurs. The cameras revealed disturbing patterns. Victoria regularly searched my father's office when he was resting. She held hushed phone conversations in the garden, speaking in coded language about accelerated timelines and final transitions. Most concerning, she personally managed my father's medications, insisting the household staff allow her to administer his pills. Something's not right with the medication, my father confided 4 weeks into our investigation. The side effects are worse than my doctors predicted. I'm deteriorating faster than expected. Marcus arranged for samples of my father's medications to be analyzed by a laboratory that owed him a favor. The results confirmed our suspicions. His pain medication had been supplemented with additional substances that, while not lethal individually, created a compound effect that exacerbated his symptoms and accelerated his decline. She's killing me slowly, my father said when I showed him the results, his voice eerily calm. Not enough to raise suspicion, just enough to ensure I don't outlive her patients. We had to move carefully. Victoria was well-connected and increasingly paranoid, often checking my father's phone and monitoring his visitors. Meanwhile, at Meridian, I received another promotion to Deputy Director of Strategic Finance, which put tremendous demands on my time but also granted me access to crucial information about industry-wide financial movements. My days became a careful balancing act, excelling at Meridian during business hours, then working late into the night analyzing Victoria's patterns and meeting my father whenever possible. I survived on minimal sleep and maximum caffeine, driven by a sense of urgency that grew with each passing week. She's accelerating her timeline, I told my father during a brief meeting in his doctor's waiting room while Victoria was shopping. The shell companies are consolidating assets. 3 of the offshore accounts have been emptied and closed. She's preparing for something major. My father nodded grimly. She's been making changes to my medical directive, bringing in different lawyers each time so no one sees the full picture. Last week she tried to get me to sign paperwork limiting who can visit me in the hospital. We developed a contingency plan. My father secretly contacted his longtime attorney, Lawrence Hoffman, a man who had been with the company since before I was born. Though Victoria had relegated him to handling minor legal matters, his loyalty to my father remained unwavering. With Lawrence's help, my father drafted a new will, one that Victoria knew nothing about. It won't be enough just to cut her out, my father explained. She'll contest it, claim I wasn't of sound mind. We need irrefutable evidence. Marcus enhanced the security system, focusing particularly on my father's home office and the master bedroom. We needed to capture Victoria incriminating herself, ideally discussing her plans or tampering with medication. But she was careful, almost never speaking openly even in what she believed was complete privacy. Our breakthrough came unexpectedly. Victoria's assistant called in sick, and she had to manage her own schedule for the day. Rushing between appointments, she left her private laptop open in the bedroom. My father, having one of his stronger days, managed to install a keystroke logger Marcus had provided before Victoria returned. The information we gathered was damning: emails to offshore accounts, conversations with co-conspirators, detailed timelines for what she called the transition. She had planned everything from my father's declining health to the corporate takeover that would follow his death. She's planning to make her move the moment I'm gone, my father said, his voice hollow as we reviewed the evidence in Lawrence's office. She's already arranged to liquidate company assets worth millions. With Lawrence's guidance, we compiled everything: financial records, security footage, medication analysis, Victoria's emails, into a comprehensive file. My father officially revised his will, with Lawrence bringing in a court-appointed witness to verify his mental competence. Everything was in place. But Victoria sensed something had changed. She increased my father's medication, limited his visitors more strictly, and began spending more time at home monitoring him. My father's condition deteriorated rapidly under the increased dosage. I was presenting quarterly projections to Meridian's board when my burner phone vibrated with a text from Marcus. Covenant initiated. St. Luke's. Our emergency code. My father had been rushed to St. Luke's Hospital. I somehow finished my presentation before rushing out, claiming a family emergency. The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic and panic. By the time I arrived, Victoria had already established herself at my father's bedside. Surrounded by hospital staff, she'd charmed into compliance. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, catching me in the corridor before I could be seen. "She's restricted visitors to immediate family only. She's telling everyone you're unstable and your presence would distress him." "Is he alive but fading fast? The doctor gives him hours, maybe a day." Marcus pressed something cold and metallic into my palm, a service key to the hospital's maintenance areas. "Room 418. There's a utility closet across the hall with a clear view. I've already set up a camera feed to Lawrence's office. Whatever happens now, we'll have it documented." I gripped the key, ice forming in my veins as rain battered against the hospital windows. The storm that had been gathering for years was finally breaking, and all I could do was watch and wait for the lightning to strike. The hospital corridors seemed endless as I followed Marcus' directions to the utility closet. My heart raced with each step, constantly glancing over my shoulder for any sign of Victoria or her allies. The service key trembled in my hand as I unlocked the closet door, slipping inside among mops and cleaning supplies. Marcus had indeed prepared well. A small monitor showed a feed from my father's room, where Victoria sat beside his bed, her perfectly manicured hand resting possessively on his arm. My father looked diminished against the white hospital sheets, tubes and monitors surrounding him like a technological cocoon. For 3 hours, I watched Victoria maintain her devoted wife performance for the medical staff. The moment they left, her demeanor changed instantly. Checking her watch impatiently, scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my father except to adjust his medication drip. When night fell and the hospital quieted for evening rounds, Marcus texted again. "Nurses station distracted. Service elevator clear." Now. In the maintenance area, he waited with a hospital orderly's uniform and ID badge. "You have 10 minutes while Victoria's getting coffee. The night nurse thinks you're from respiratory therapy coming to check his oxygen levels." I changed quickly, tucking my hair under the cap and keeping my face down as I pushed a cart of supplies toward room 418. My hands shook as I swiped the badge, the door opening with a soft click. Dad lay with his eyes closed, his breathing shallow and labored. "Dad," I whispered, touching his hand gently. "It's me." His eyelids fluttered open, recognition dawning slowly. "Allie, you came." His voice was a raspy whisper. "I don't have much time," I said, checking the monitoring equipment as though performing routine tasks. "Victoria's controlling everything. Listen carefully." Each word seemed to cost him tremendous effort. "Lawrence has everything. But there's more." He gestured weakly toward the small cabinet beside his bed. "Blue tile. Bathroom, behind." I moved to the adjoining bathroom, fingers probing the blue tiles until one shifted slightly. Behind it was a small cavity containing a key wrapped in a handwritten note with an address and box number. "Safe deposit," my father whispered when I returned to his bedside. "Insurance policy. She doesn't know." The sound of voices in the hallway sent panic through me. "Dad, I have to go." His fingers tightened around mine with surprising strength. "I'm so sorry, Allie. For everything." "I know, Dad." The door began to open. I ducked behind the privacy curtain, heart pounding in my chest. "Robert, darling, they were out of the good coffee." Victoria's voice dripped with false sweetness. "Oh, you're awake. Perfect timing." From my hiding place, I watched through a gap in the curtain as Victoria settled into the chair beside my father, pulling papers from her designer handbag. "The lawyers found some inconsistencies in your medical power of attorney," she explained, uncapping a pen. "Just a quick signature to clean things up. You know how these legal details can be." My father's eyes flicked momentarily toward the hidden camera in the room's smoke detector. "What inconsistencies?" Victoria's smile remained fixed, but her voice hardened slightly. "Just some outdated language about permitted treatments and who can make decisions. The doctors recommend we update it immediately, given your condition. She positioned the papers and placed the pen in his trembling hand. With effort, my father raised his head slightly, eyes squinting at the document. This isn't power of attorney. This is will amendment. Victoria's smile faltered briefly. It's a comprehensive update, Robert. Your medications must be confusing you. The doctor said your condition is affecting your comprehension. Just sign, darling. I want Lawrence to review first. Her practiced composure cracked slightly. Lawrence is on vacation. We've discussed this, Robert. Besides, he's not equipped to handle matters of this complexity anymore. Then I won't sign. My father let the pen drop from his fingers. For a split second, fury flashed across Victoria's face before she controlled it. Robert, be reasonable. Your condition is deteriorating. We need to. A nurse entered to check vitals, forcing Victoria to resume her devoted wife performance. I used the distraction to slip out, the safe deposit key burning in my pocket like a talisman. The next morning I met Lawrence at the bank. The safe deposit box contained everything we needed. Original documents tracing Victoria's embezzlement back 5 years, records of conversations with her co-conspirators, and a recorded confession from one of Victoria's earliest partners who'd been cut out of the scheme. Your father was more thorough than any of us realized, Lawrence said as we catalogued the evidence. He's been collecting this for over a year, long before he reached out to you. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. He's gone. 5:36 a.m. She's already making calls. The world seemed to stop. Despite our complicated history and the pain between us, losing my father felt like losing a part of myself. I allowed myself exactly 3 minutes of grief before refocusing on what needed to be done. We need to move quickly, I told Lawrence. Victoria will try to take control of everything immediately. The funeral was held 3 days later, an elaborate affair that spoke more to Victoria's desire for public sympathy than any genuine mourning. I attended quietly, wearing a simple black dress and veil, standing at the back of the church. Several old family friends recognized me, their whispers spreading through the gathering. That's the daughter. The troubled one. Heard she had a breakdown, institutionalized. Should she even be here? After what she put Robert through. Victoria played her role perfectly, the grieving widow supported by sympathetic friends, occasionally dabbing at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She acknowledged my presence with the barest nod, her eyes communicating a clear message. You don't belong here. The real performance came 3 days later at the reading of the will in Lawrence's office. Victoria arrived with her personal attorney, dressed immaculately in designer mourning clothes, an air of scarcely contained triumph surrounding her. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me sitting quietly in the corner, but she recovered quickly. Allison. How unexpected. I wasn't aware you'd be joining us for these private family matters. Mr. Hoffman invited me, I replied simply. Did he? Her smile was glacial. How interesting considering the terms of Robert's will. Lawrence entered carrying 2 folders and a laptop. He greeted everyone solemnly before taking his seat at the head of the conference table. Before we begin, he said, I'm required to inform everyone that this proceeding is being recorded for legal purposes. Victoria nodded impatiently. Of course. Shall we proceed? I have arrangements waiting that require my attention. Certainly. Lawrence opened the first folder. This is the last will and testament of Robert James Matthews, dated January 12th of last year, which leaves the entirety of his estate to his wife, Victoria Elaine Matthews, with the exception of a small charitable donation. Victoria's smile grew, her eyes flicking toward me with barely concealed satisfaction. However, Lawrence continued, producing the second folder, I also have in my possession a subsequent will, properly executed and witnessed, dated just 1 day before Mr. Matthews' death. The color drained from Victoria's face. That's impossible. Robert was barely conscious his final days. He couldn't possibly. I have video confirmation of his mental competency at the time of signing, Lawrence interrupted, turning his laptop to face the room. Along with this rather illuminating footage from Mr. Matthews' hospital room. I don't understand what you're saying. There must be some mistake. The lawyer's voice echoed through the funeral home as he pulled out a second will, dated just 1 day before my father's death. Victoria's triumphant smile vanished instantly. The security footage from my father's hospital room appeared on the screen, and 5 years of carefully orchestrated vengeance finally came full circle. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived. My husband mocked me, calling me useless as a wife, in front of his friends. He thought I'd break, thought I'd beg for approval. Instead, I showed him exactly how useless I could be, when I stopped caring, stopped trying, stopped being his safety net. And when he fell, no one was there to catch him. The sound of laughter crashed over me like a tidal wave, drowning out the very air in my lungs. My hands, still damp from washing the last dish, trembled as I gripped the kitchen counter. The voices coming from the dining room were familiar. Jason's friends, the men he admired, the ones whose opinions mattered more to him than mine ever had. And then his voice rose above them all. "She's pretty much useless, honestly," Jason said, his words sharp and effortless like they meant nothing. "I mean, she's nice to have around, but let's be real, she doesn't actually do anything." A chorus of laughter followed. The blood in my veins turned to ice. My fingers curled into my palm, nails pressing into my skin. I stood frozen behind the kitchen doorway, unseen but fully exposed, as though I had been stripped of all dignity in a single breath. Useless. The word rang in my ears, bouncing off the walls, sinking into every corner of my being. I swallowed hard, stepping back as Jason continued, oblivious to my presence. "I mean, I let her play house, you know? It keeps her occupied. But honestly, if she left tomorrow, nothing would really change." More laughter. And just like that, something inside me broke. Not in the way he expected. I didn't cry. I didn't storm in and demand an apology. I didn't plead for his respect. Instead, I smiled. Not because I found it funny, but because, in that moment, I understood something I had been blind to for far too long. Jason thought he was untouchable. He believed I was so devoted, so dependent, that I would always be there, cooking his meals, washing his clothes, running his life while he played the role of the charming, successful husband. But he had just made a critical mistake. He had shown me exactly how little I meant to him. And that meant I was free. I turned away, my mind already racing. I wouldn't yell. I wouldn't argue. He expected that. He was used to me fighting for his approval. But tonight something was different. I wasn't hurt. I was done. And Jason? He had no idea that by the time he realized what he had lost, it would be far too late. I walked upstairs with deliberate steps, the sound of Jason's laughter still ringing in my ears. Each footstep felt heavier, like I was shedding an invisible weight with every step. The woman who had walked into this house as a devoted, eager-to-please wife was gone. The one climbing these stairs was someone entirely different. Someone who had finally opened her eyes. I entered the bedroom, the familiar space that once felt like a sanctuary now resembling a cage. The neatly made bed, the framed wedding photo on the dresser, the soft glow of the bedside lamp. All of it felt foreign. My fingers hovered over the picture for a moment before I turned it face down. Jason's words played in my head on an endless loop, but instead of hurting, they fueled something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity. He had spent years chipping away at my confidence, making me question my worth. Tonight he had simply said out loud what he had always believed. That was his mistake. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. A moment later, the bedroom door swung open. Jason strolled in, loose tie draped around his neck, smelling of expensive whiskey and arrogance. He stretched his arms, yawning as if he had just returned from an exhausting battle rather than an evening of belittling his wife. "That went well, don't you think?" he said casually, kicking off his shoes. I didn't answer. I simply walked into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. For the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror, really looked. The reflection staring back wasn't weak, nor was it broken. It was someone on the edge of transformation. A plan began to form. Not an act of revenge. Not a desperate attempt to win back his respect. No, this was something far more powerful. I would disappear, not physically but in every way that had made his life effortless. I had been his safety net, his silent fixer, the one who cleaned up the messes he didn't even notice. That ended now. The next morning I woke up before him. That wasn't unusual. I was always the first to rise, preparing breakfast, ironing his shirt, making sure everything ran like a well-oiled machine. But today was different. I stayed in bed. The alarm blared. Jason stirred, reaching blindly to snooze it before groggily sitting up. His gaze flickered toward me in confusion. "You feeling sick or something?" he asked, rubbing his face. I stared at the ceiling. No. He frowned but didn't push further. When he left the room, expecting the scent of coffee and warm toast waiting downstairs, I remained where I was, unmoved. From the bed, I heard the rustling of cabinets, the frustrated sighs as he searched for something to eat. A spoon clattered into the sink. A cabinet slammed. My lips curled. Minutes later he reappeared, adjusting his tie. You didn't make breakfast? I turned my head slightly, meeting his gaze with an expression so neutral it was unsettling. Didn't feel like it. His brows knitted together, but he shook his head as if dismissing a minor inconvenience. All right. I'll grab something on the way. For Jason, this was a small glitch in an otherwise predictable system. What he didn't realize was that it was the beginning of a complete collapse. The first few days passed with little reaction. He assumed I was in a mood, that this was some silent protest I would abandon once I got tired of proving a point. He carried on, adjusting where necessary. But as the days stretched, the small cracks in his carefully curated world widened. His morning coffee was no longer perfectly brewed and waiting. His shirts were wrinkled. Appointments he had never kept track of began slipping past him. Bills I had always handled went unpaid. The house, once an extension of my care, started reflecting my absence in ways he wasn't prepared for. The laundry piled up. Dishes remained in the sink longer than usual. Calls went unanswered because I was no longer there to remind him to return them. Jason prided himself on control, but without me managing the invisible workload of his life, he was unraveling in slow motion. One evening he walked in late, tension visible in the rigid line of his shoulders. He tossed his briefcase onto the couch and ran a hand through his hair. Missed an important meeting today, he muttered, loosening his tie. I barely looked up from my book. His jaw tightened. You could have reminded me. I turned a page. I could have. Silence stretched between us. For the first time in our marriage, he didn't hold all the power in the room. The man who had laughed at me in front of his friends now stood before me, uncertain, unsettled, unmoored. And I had never felt more in control. The changes weren't just within the house. I had started stepping into a world that had once felt distant. One where I wasn't just a wife but a person with her own ambitions. My days were no longer spent ensuring Jason's comfort. Instead, I had lunch with old colleagues, reconnected with people who had once respected me for my skills, not my role as someone's spouse. A week passed. The shift was undeniable. Jason noticed, though he didn't fully understand what was happening. He saw the way I dressed differently, the way I carried myself with quiet confidence, the way my attention was no longer tethered to him. One evening as I walked through the door later than usual, he was waiting. Arms crossed, expression unreadable. Where have you been? I set down my bag. Out. With who? I met his gaze, unflinching. Does it matter? His lips parted but no words came. He wasn't used to this version of me. The woman who had once molded herself around his needs no longer existed. Jason. He was beginning to realize just how much he had relied on someone he had dismissed as insignificant. But he still thought he could fix it. He believed I was going through a phase, that if he ignored it long enough I would return to the version of myself that made his life easier. He was wrong. The night Jason humiliated me in front of his friends, he thought he had made a harmless joke. What he had actually done was set off a chain reaction that he couldn't stop. And soon he would learn just how much I had truly changed. Jason's confusion turned into frustration. He had expected me to snap out of it, to fall back into routine, to be the person who made his life seamless again. But that version of me no longer existed. I wasn't arguing. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't even angry. And that terrified him more than anything. I had become an enigma in my own home, present yet untouchable. My absence wasn't physical, but it was felt in every crack of his unraveling world. No longer the woman waiting at the door with a warm meal, no longer the invisible force managing his schedule, ensuring he never missed a call, a deadline, a responsibility. He started coming home earlier, watching me as if trying to decode an unfamiliar language. His gaze lingered longer, eyes scanning for signs of the woman who used to cater to him. But she was gone. One evening, he attempted conversation over dinner, a meal he had ordered because I no longer cooked. The silence between us was thick. He tapped his fingers against the wooden table, a nervous rhythm that betrayed his growing unease. "You've been different lately," he finally muttered, watching me. I took a slow sip of water, meeting his gaze with unshaken calm. "Have I?" His brow furrowed. "You don't do things anymore." I set my glass down carefully. "What things?" A flicker of frustration crossed his face. "You know what I mean." I let his words hang between us, neither confirming nor denying. He needed me to react, to show some form of emotion, to fight. But I had no interest in playing his game anymore. Days turned into weeks, and his structured life spiraled further. Meetings were missed, his routine collapsed, small annoyances turned into significant setbacks. I watched as the consequences of my absence stacked up around him. He wasn't handling it well. One evening, after a particularly stressful day at work, he walked in, tossing his keys onto the counter with more force than necessary. His shoulders were tense, his jaw locked. "I got chewed out today," he said, expecting sympathy. I raised a brow but said nothing. Jason exhaled sharply. "You didn't remind me about the report." I blinked. "The report? The one I had to submit today?" I tilted my head slightly. "Did you need reminding?" His nostrils flared. "You always remind me." I leaned back against my chair, arms crossing loosely. "Not anymore." A muscle in his jaw twitched. This was the moment he finally grasped what had changed. I wasn't just pulling away. I had removed myself completely from the role he had cast me in. But Jason wasn't one to admit fault. Not yet. Instead, he tested the waters, trying to gauge how deep this shift ran. He attempted small gestures. A compliment here, a forced joke there. But none of it reached me. He wasn't used to being ignored, to not having control. One night, as I prepared for bed, he lingered in the doorway. "Are we okay?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. I met his gaze in the dim light. "Are we?" He hesitated, as if trying to find the right words. But what could he say? That he missed the wife he had disregarded? That he longed for the woman he had mocked in front of his friends? That he needed me, not for love but because without me his life was falling apart? Instead, he nodded once and walked away. I lay awake that night, listening to the sound of his breathing. He was restless, unsettled, and for the first time he was experiencing what it meant to be the one left in uncertainty. Jason wasn't just losing me, he was losing the power he had taken for granted. He didn't realize it yet, but the war had already been won. Because I no longer cared if he lost. Jason tossed and turned, unable to find comfort in the silence that used to be his refuge. Every exhale, every shift in the bed, every moment of stillness carried a weight he had never noticed before. He was restless, but not for the reasons he once assumed. The house felt different now, empty in a way that had nothing to do with space. It wasn't the absence of sound nor the lack of warmth. It was something deeper. A void he couldn't name. I lay beside him, unmoving, eyes fixed on the ceiling. Sleep was distant, yet I felt no exhaustion. Awareness coursed through me, sharpening every sense. The rise and fall of his breath, the faint creak of the mattress, the tension radiating from his body. All of it told me what he would never say. He was unraveling. The next morning he woke with dark circles beneath his eyes. He dragged himself out of bed, movements sluggish as if weighed down by something unseen. His usual routine, shower, shave, coffee, work, had lost its rhythm. He moved through the motions but with hesitation, as though questioning each step. I watched him from across the room, silent. He caught my gaze in the mirror, pausing mid-button on his shirt. A flicker of something passed through his expression. Hesitation, perhaps. Or uncertainty. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then thought better of it. Glad he left. I waited until the front door closed before exhaling. A slow release of air I hadn't realized I was holding. The air in the house was lighter without him, the walls breathing easier in his absence. Days blurred into one another, each one chipping away at the carefully crafted illusion of control he had maintained for years. The calls he once ignored now demanded attention. Deadlines loomed unchecked. His social circle, the same men who had once laughed at my expense, had grown distant. Without the seamless structure I had provided, his world had begun to shift in ways he never anticipated. One evening, I returned home later than usual, the scent of unfamiliar cologne clinging to my clothes. Jason was waiting, leaning against the counter, arms crossed. His gaze swept over me, analyzing, searching. "Where were you?" His voice carried an edge, sharp but not yet cutting. I placed my bag down with measured ease. "Out." His jaw tightened. Out where? I met his stare, unblinking. Does it matter? A muscle twitched in his cheek. It does to me. I let the words linger, absorbing the weight of his admission. He was grasping at control, at the remnants of a dynamic that no longer existed. I shrugged. That's new. His expression flickered. Shock, frustration, something else he didn't want to name. He pushed off the counter, closing the space between us. Why are you doing this? I tilted my head slightly, pretending to consider the question. Doing what? His exhale was sharp. This, whatever it is. You're distant. You don't care. You act like I don't exist. I let out a small laugh, not out of amusement, but because the irony was almost poetic. I learned from the best. His eyes darkened, realization creeping in. He had spent years dismissing me, overlooking my presence until I became nothing more than a fixture in his life. And now, for the first time, he was on the receiving end of that indifference. He took a step closer. Is there someone else? The accusation hung between us, a desperate grasp for an explanation that would make sense to him. The idea that I had simply chosen to detach on my own terms was something he couldn't comprehend. I held his gaze, letting the moment stretch until his certainty wavered. Would it change anything if there was? His breath hitched just slightly, but enough for me to catch it. He wasn't used to this feeling. Insecurity had never been his burden to bear. I picked up my bag again, brushing past him without another word. I felt his eyes on me as I walked away, the weight of his thoughts pressing against my back. That night he didn't sleep. I heard him pacing, the floorboards creaking under the rhythm of his thoughts. The cracks in his perfect world had become impossible to ignore. And soon they would shatter completely. The clock on the bedside table glowed in the darkness, each second dragging longer than the last. Jason lay beside me, rigid, his breathing uneven. The weight of the silence between us had grown unbearable, pressing into every corner of the room. He had always been so sure of himself, so convinced that nothing in his world could shift without his command. But the balance had tipped, and he was scrambling to reclaim the control slipping through his fingers. Long after I had turned away, feigning sleep, I heard him exhale sharply. A restless movement followed, sheets rustling as he turned onto his back. The man who had once slept soundly without a care was now wide awake, trapped in the uncertainty of his own making. By morning he was already up, pacing near the dresser. I felt the hesitation in his movements, the unspoken conflict hanging between us. He was waiting, for me to acknowledge him, to bridge the distance he had once forced upon me. But I had no intention of making this easier for him. When I finally stretched, sitting up with slow precision, his eyes darted toward me, searching for something. An opening, perhaps. A moment of weakness. He found none. Do you have plans today? His voice was casual, but the tension behind it was unmistakable. I reached for my robe, slipping it over my shoulders before standing. I do. A flicker of something passed through his expression. Uncertainty. Frustration. Maybe even regret. With who? He pressed, the strain in his voice barely masked. I smoothed the fabric over my arms, taking my time. Does it matter? Jason's jaw clenched. He had asked this before, and my answer remained unchanged. What had once been his favorite game, keeping me on edge, making me second-guess myself, had turned against him. Now he was the one seeking answers, the one left grasping for control. I'll see you later, I said simply, stepping past him without another glance. The house felt lighter the moment I walked out the door. My world had expanded beyond the walls that once confined me, and with each passing day, I found myself rediscovering the parts of me that had been buried beneath years of neglect. I met with old acquaintances, rekindled conversations that had once been a source of joy. Opportunities arose, ones I never would have pursued before. There was an entire existence waiting for me beyond the role I had been assigned, and I was finally embracing it. Jason, however, was unraveling. His attempts to reclaim the dynamic we once had grew desperate. He started coming home earlier, offering small gestures, things that might have once softened me. A compliment here. An unexpected coffee there. But it was too late for all that. He wasn't doing these things because he cared. He was doing them because he was afraid. The realization struck him one evening when he walked through the door and found me laughing. Not the polite, restrained chuckle he had grown accustomed to, but a genuine, uninhibited laugh. The kind that came from deep within. The kind he hadn't heard in years. I was on the phone, engaged in a conversation that had nothing to do with him. When I looked up and saw him standing there, frozen in the doorway, something in his expression shifted. He had always believed I belonged to him, that I existed in relation to his presence. But at that moment he saw the truth. I was no longer his to define. He took a step forward, then hesitated. Who was that? I ended the call, setting my phone down with deliberate ease. An old friend. His hands curled into fists at his sides. Since when do you have old friends? A slow smile tugged at my lips. Since always. Jason exhaled harshly, dragging a hand through his hair. We need to talk. I leaned against the counter, crossing my arms. About what? His frustration cracked through his carefully controlled facade. About us. About whatever this is. You've changed and I... He stopped himself, exhaling sharply. I don't know what's happening anymore. For the first time, Jason wasn't the one in control. He was standing in the ruins of a life he had built on the assumption that I would always be there to catch him. But I had stepped aside. And now he was falling. You don't know what's happening? I repeated, tilting my head. Then let me explain it to you. His gaze locked onto mine, a silent plea hidden behind the frustration. You spent years treating me like an afterthought, I continued, my voice steady. You laughed at my expense. You dismissed me. And you assumed I would always stay no matter how little you gave in return. He flinched, but I didn't stop. But here's the thing, Jason, I said, pushing off the counter and closing the space between us. I woke up. I realized I don't need to be someone's shadow. I don't need to beg for respect. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. I never meant to. You never meant for me to notice, I interrupted, my voice sharp. But I did. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, Jason was speechless. He had spent years under the impression that he held all the power, that I would always be there, waiting. But reality had shifted, and he was standing in unfamiliar territory, unsteady and unsure. I grabbed my purse, turning toward the door. I'll be back late. His hand shot out, grabbing my wrist. Wait. I looked down at his fingers wrapped around my arm. Slowly, deliberately, I pried them away. Goodbye, Jason. And with that, I walked out, leaving him standing alone in a house that no longer felt like home. The cold night air wrapped around me as I stepped onto the quiet street, leaving behind the suffocating weight of Jason's presence. My heels clicked against the pavement, each step taking me further from the life I had once clung to. The realization of my own freedom settled deep within me, an unfamiliar but exhilarating sensation. I didn't check my phone. I didn't turn back. I knew what I'd see if I did. Jason standing frozen in the doorway, still trying to piece together how everything had changed so drastically. But understanding wouldn't come easily for him. Not yet. The city lights flickered ahead, casting a soft glow over the sidewalks. I walked without direction, simply letting the movement soothe me. The world had always been this vast, this full of possibilities, yet I had spent years believing my existence was confined to the four walls of a house that never truly felt like mine. Tonight, that illusion was gone. By the time I reached the restaurant, I was no longer the woman Jason had dismissed for so long. I was someone entirely new, someone who no longer needed permission to take up space. Inside, laughter and conversation filled the air, a stark contrast to the silence that had once suffocated me. I spotted familiar faces, people I had once known before I had disappeared into the role of being his wife. They welcomed me back without hesitation, as if no time had passed. As the evening unfolded, I felt lighter than I had in years. I engaged in conversations that had nothing to do with schedules, responsibilities, or expectations. I laughed without restraint. I existed without obligation. Meanwhile, Jason was alone. Hours later, when I finally returned, the house was dark except for a single light in the living room. He was waiting, shoulders tense, gaze locked onto the floor, as if the answers to his unspoken questions lay somewhere in the patterns of the carpet. The moment the door clicked shut behind me, his head lifted and our eyes met. You didn't answer my calls, he said, voice low, measured. I slipped off my coat, unbothered. I know. His brows drew together. Where were you? I crossed the room, setting my purse down without urgency. Out. The simplicity of my response made his frustration spike. His fingers curled into fists at his sides. I deserve an answer. A humorless chuckle escaped me. Do you? Jason exhaled sharply, dragging a hand down his face. He was unraveling in real time, trying to grasp at a reality he had never considered possible. He had spent so long believing I would always be there, that I would always prioritize him, that the idea of me existing beyond him was something he couldn't process. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted, voice raw with an emotion I had never heard from him before. I studied him for a moment, taking in the weight of his confession. It was the first time he had acknowledged that something was broken. But the problem was, I no longer needed him to fix anything. You can't, I said simply. The words landed heavily between us. His breathing faltered, his entire posture shifting as if the ground beneath him had crumbled. Jason had always operated under the assumption that no matter how much distance he put between us emotionally, I would always be waiting on the other side, willing to close the gap. But now there was nothing left to bridge. He moved closer as if proximity could undo the damage. I know I hurt you, he admitted, the weight of the truth pressing against his words. I was careless. I took you for granted. I didn't deny it. His hands raked through his hair, frustration evident. I thought you'd always be here. That was the problem. He had never truly seen me, only the version of me that existed to make his life easier. But now, as he stood before me, vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself to be, it was clear that he finally understood. But it was too late. I reached for my bag again, my decision already made. I'm leaving. His breath hitched. Leaving. I nodded. For good. Panic flashed across his features, raw and unfiltered. We can fix this. I shook my head. No, Jason. You want to fix this because you don't like what it feels like to lose. But that's not love. That's fear. Silence stretched between us, heavier than any argument we had ever had. He swallowed hard. What if I change? A soft, sad smile tugged at my lips. Then do it for yourself. He searched my face for something, hesitation, doubt, anything that would suggest he had a chance. But there was nothing left for him to hold on to. I turned toward the door, my heart steady, my resolve unshaken. And this time when I walked away, I knew I was never coming back. I stepped out of that house without looking back. The night air pressed against my skin, crisp and fresh, as if the universe itself had exhaled with me. My footsteps were steady, firm, carrying me toward a future that no longer held the weight of my past. The door behind me remained closed, and for once I didn't wonder if it would ever open again. Jason had always assumed I was tethered to him, as though I had no existence beyond the role he had carved for me. But with every breath I took, the truth settled deeper within me. I had never belonged to him. I had simply forgotten my own worth. Now, with the weight of his expectations gone, I felt something unfamiliar take its place. Relief. The city buzzed around me, alive and untamed, mirroring the energy humming beneath my skin. I wasn't lost. I wasn't afraid. I was free. As I walked toward the cab waiting at the end of the street, my phone vibrated. I didn't need to check. I already knew who it was. Jason, unable to let go, trying to reach through the distance he had never expected to exist between us. I let it ring. Inside the car, I exhaled, staring out at the world stretching ahead. For the first time in years, my future wasn't shaped by his needs or desires. It was mine. Unwritten. Boundless. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. Where to? I smiled, savoring the power of my own decision. Anywhere but here. The vehicle pulled away, taking me further from the life I had outgrown. Somewhere behind me in that quiet, darkened house, Jason was alone. He had thought I would always be there, waiting. He had believed my love was unconditional, that my loyalty was unbreakable. He had been wrong. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Without the invisible chains of obligation, I rediscovered parts of myself I had long abandoned. Mornings weren't dictated by his schedule. Nights weren't spent waiting for his return. Every choice belonged to me. I found a small apartment, nothing extravagant, but it was mine. A space untouched by the past, filled only with things I loved. Colors I chose. Books that lined my shelves, not because they impressed guests, but because they spoke to my soul. My days were filled with purpose beyond service. I enrolled in classes, reignited passions I had once shelved. Opportunities blossomed in the places I had forgotten to look. Independence wasn't just an idea. It became my reality. Jason. He called. He texted. Each message carried a desperation he had never shown before. Apologies arrived in long-winded paragraphs, filled with words he had never spoken when it mattered. Promises dripped from his lips like honey, but they no longer held any sweetness. I read them but never responded. One evening as I sipped coffee at a small cafe, a familiar presence entered. He looked different, less sure, more hesitant. He spotted me and exhaled as if relieved to have found me. He approached with careful steps, uncertainty woven into every movement. "Can we talk?" I set my cup down, meeting his gaze with unwavering calm. "About what?" His throat bobbed as he swallowed. "Us." A soft laugh escaped me, not cruel but amused by the irony. "There is no us, Jason." His jaw tightened. "I messed up. I see that now." I tilted my head, studying him. "Do you? Or do you just miss the way I made your life easier?" He hesitated, and in that moment I had my answer. Jason wasn't here because he loved me. He was here because he had lost something irreplaceable. His safety net, his constant. He had never expected me to walk away, never imagined a reality where I no longer needed him. But that was his burden to bear, not mine. I picked up my cup again, taking a slow sip before standing. "I wish you well, Jason." His brows furrowed. "That's it." I smiled, a genuine one this time. "That's all that's left." And with that I left him sitting there watching as I walked away. The past no longer had a hold on me. My future was mine to create, and I had never felt more alive.